The house recorded no intruders, no alarms, no signs of struggle. It insists the man inside died naturally. The problem is, someone made sure the house would believe that. The first lie the house ever told was not spoken. It was implied. It was built into the language people used when they described it. They called it secure. They called it intelligent. They called it safe. But the house had no concept of safety. It had a concept of states. Open, closed, occupied, unoccupied, authorized, unauthorized. The difference between those words was not moral. It was mechanical. And on the night Gideon Ashford died, the house remained mechanical to the end. That was the problem. Gideon Ashford liked to arrive exactly on time. Not a minute early, too eager. Not a minute late, too human. His driver eased the car through the wrought iron gates at precisely 7:30, and the gates recognized the vehicle before Gideon's hand had reached for the door handle. A soft chime sounded from a hidden speaker. The driveway lights brightened in a sequence that looked like courtesy but functioned like calibration. A voice, neutral, genderless by design, spoke through the cabin speakers, clear enough to feel intimate. "Good evening, Gideon. Welcome home." Gideon didn't respond. He rarely did. He had built the system that spoke to him, but he didn't enjoy conversation with his own engineering. He treated it the way some men treated mirrors, useful, silent, expected to reflect without opinion. The house emerged beyond the trees like an artifact from a different century. Glass and stone, low and wide, expensive in the quiet way that didn't require height to demonstrate dominance. The estate sat in Surrey countryside, far enough from central London to feel private, close enough to remain relevant. A place where people could vanish from cameras without vanishing from influence. The facade was deliberately restrained. Gideon didn't like extravagance. He liked inevitability. Inside, however, the house was a machine wrapped in taste. Sensors were embedded in plaster. Cameras disguised as light fixtures. Microphones hidden in vents, listening not for words but for anomalies. Pressure transducers beneath the flooring. Infrared arrays behind decorative panels. Air quality monitors, motion analytics, heartbeat detection in the armrest of Gideon's favorite chair. No single device was remarkable. The architecture of the house was not a showcase of gadgets. It was a showcase of coordination. The system that ran it had a name meant to sound harmless. Orchid. A flower. An acronym if you wanted it to be. But Gideon rarely used the name. Names invited intimacy. He preferred functions. Tonight, the house had one function above all. Convince.
Understand
Naomi Klein was already inside when Gideon entered. She stood in the central hall, laptop tucked against her ribs like a shield, posture too precise for relaxation. She had the look of someone who lived in logic the way others lived in skin. Her hair was pinned cleanly back, her jacket was sharp, and her eyes were too bright. Her eyes always did that when something important was on the line. And tonight was important. The Ashford residence wasn't simply Gideon's home. It was Ashford Systems' flagship narrative, the proof that the company didn't just sell software. It sold a world where uncertainty could be tamed. Naomi smiled when she saw Gideon. "Good," she said. "You're early." Gideon checked his watch almost reflexively. "I'm on time," he corrected. Naomi's smile tightened. "That's what I meant," she said. Behind her, the entryway camera light flickered briefly, an invisible recalibration that would later become a point of argument. A tiny adjustment the system made when a known face crossed a threshold. Naomi did not notice. Gideon did and ignored it. "Where is Miles?" he asked. Naomi hesitated, then glanced toward the living wing. "Walking the guest route," she said. "He wants to control what they see first." Gideon exhaled, not quite a sigh. Miles Cole always wanted to control what people saw first. He called it managing perception. Gideon called it nervousness dressed up as strategy. "You've checked everything?" Gideon asked Naomi. Naomi's chin lifted slightly. "Twice," she said. "And I had the team do a full diagnostic sweep this afternoon." Gideon nodded. "And Orchid?" he asked. Naomi's eyes flicked, almost imperceptibly, toward the ceiling. "Stable," she said. No anomalies in the last 72 hours. Good, Gideon said. Then, because he was Gideon Ashford and could not resist the temptation to confirm his own philosophy, he added, people believe what behaves consistently. Naomi didn't respond. She knew when Gideon was preaching. She also knew that a system behaving consistently did not mean it behaved correctly. It meant it behaved predictably. And predictability, Naomi understood, was a weapon someone else could learn to use.
Understand
The guests arrived at 8, not all at once, in a carefully staggered sequence that allowed the house to greet each one as if it had anticipated them personally. A minister's aide, a venture capital partner, a technology journalist with a smile too friendly to be trusted, a private security consultant who couldn't resist examining door frames the way others examined art. And at the center of it all, bright, flawless, and politely cold, Evelyn Ashford. Evelyn did not look like a woman married to a man who believed in systems more than people. She looked like a woman who understood systems better than Gideon ever had. Her dress was understated, expensive in the same way the house was expensive, without needing to announce its cost. Her voice was smooth, her laughter restrained, and her eyes measured every person in the room as if she were taking inventory. When she approached Naomi, her smile warmed by exactly 2 degrees. Dr. Klein, Evelyn said. I'm so glad you could make it. Naomi gave a small professional nod. I wouldn't miss it, she replied. Evelyn's gaze moved briefly to Naomi's laptop. Still working, she observed. Always, Naomi said. Evelyn smiled. I envy that, she said. Some people only work when there's an audience. Naomi's face remained neutral, but she felt the line for what it was. Not a compliment, not an insult, an assessment. Evelyn leaned closer slightly, voice lower. Is it ready? She asked. Naomi glanced toward Gideon across the room. Gideon was already in conversation with the venture partner, gesturing casually as if he were discussing architecture rather than surveillance. He looked relaxed because he believed the night was under his control. It's ready, Naomi said. Evelyn's smile held. For his sake, she murmured. Then she moved away, leaving Naomi with a faint, uncomfortable sensation. Not fear. Pressure. Evelyn Ashford applied pressure the way Gideon applied logic. Quietly, so that the person under it would believe they were simply standing in place.
Understand
Miles Quill appeared a moment later, as if summoned by Naomi's tension. He was a man in his late 40s with careful hair and a voice that never fully committed to emotion. He looked like someone who practiced calm in the mirror and always got it right. Naomi, he said warmly. How are we feeling? Naomi's eyes narrowed. We're not feeling anything, she said. We're operating. Miles smiled as if he loved being corrected. Excellent, he said. Operating is what the investors like. Naomi's tone was clipped. Investors don't understand the system, she said. Miles's smile didn't change. That's why they like it, he replied. He glanced toward the hallway where 2 small wall panels were flush with the plaster. To a casual guest, they looked like decorative features. To Naomi, they were access points. Miles lowered his voice. Journalists here, he murmured. Naomi's shoulders tensed. Which one? She asked. Which one? She asked. Miles tilted his head toward a man near the fireplace. Grant Mercer. Not Daniel Mercer. Grant. No relation, though people would assume otherwise. Grant was the kind of journalist who wrote in clean sentences and asked dirty questions. He smiled as if he were grateful for hospitality, but his eyes scanned for contradictions. Naomi felt her jaw tighten. What is he doing here? She asked. Miles shrugged lightly. He asked, he said. And it looked worse to refuse. Naomi's voice sharpened. This isn't a press tour, she said. Miles's eyes flickered with something that might have been impatience. It's always a press tour, he said softly. That's what a demonstration is. Naomi stared at him. Miles leaned closer, tone gentle. Just make it flawless, he said. And he'll have nothing to write. Naomi felt a familiar irritation. People always believe perfection silenced critics. In reality, perfection invited them. Dinner was served at 8:30. Not by staff. By the house. At least that was how Gideon framed it. The kitchen had staff, of course, but the system coordinated the sequence. Temperature control, lighting adjustments, audio dampening. Orchid managed the environment like a conductor, smoothing everything into effortless luxury. The dining room lights softened. The windows darkened slightly, cutting glare. The sound of wind outside was reduced by an automatic dampening system that adjusted window seals by micromillimeters. Gideon stood at the head of the table, glass in hand. He didn't toast. Toasts were sentimental. He gave a statement. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You're here because you influence decisions. And decisions determine whether our civilization remains stable." A ripple of polite laughter moved around the table. People laughing not because something was funny, but because silence would have felt like dissent. Gideon continued. "In the last 10 years, security has become theater," he said. "Locks, cameras, guards, symbols. They create the illusion of safety, while leaving the actual vulnerabilities untouched." Naomi watched the guests carefully. The minister's aide nodded with performative seriousness. The venture partner looked pleased. Grant Mercer looked mildly amused. Gideon gestured subtly toward the ceiling. "This house is not theater," Gideon said. "It does not feel safe. It is safe." Naomi's fingers tightened around her wine glass. She hated that sentence. Not because it was arrogant, because it was irresistible. People loved certainty. They would pay anything for it. Gideon looked at Naomi briefly. "Orchid does not sleep," he said. "It does not forget. It does not get distracted by emotion. It sees and records what humans miss." He smiled then, the closest he came to warmth. "Most importantly," he said, "it cannot be bribed." Evelyn sipped her wine. "Can people?" she asked sweetly. The table laughed again, slightly louder. Gideon glanced at her, expression unreadable. "People are variables," he said. "That's why we reduce the human factor." Naomi watched Evelyn smile. It never wavered, but her eyes held something sharper. Not disagreement. Opportunity. After dinner, Gideon led them through the house. Not casually, deliberately. He was showing them a story one room at a time. The living room, where the furniture looked casual but every angle was optimized for camera coverage. The hallway, where the art placement disguised sensor arrays. The private library, where Gideon's books were real but arranged to create predictable pathways. Then the feature room, the secure suite. Gideon paused at the doorway. "This," he said, "is where people get frightened." The door looked ordinary. A wooden slab with clean lines, tasteful hardware. But the lock was not a lock. It was a state change. Naomi stepped forward and touched a panel in the wall. A thin line of light appeared, scanning Gideon's face. "Verified," Orchid said softly. The door unlocked without a click. Clicks were old technology. The suite inside was simple. A bed, a desk, a chair, and walls with no visible vents. No visible cameras. Naomi saw guests scan the corners. They were looking for familiar signs of surveillance. That was always the mistake. Surveillance no longer needed to be seen to be real. "This room," Gideon said, "has no blind spots." Grant Mercer raised an eyebrow. "None?" he asked. Gideon smiled politely. "None," he repeated. Grant gestured toward the ceiling. "So you can prove no one entered or left?" he asked. Gideon nodded. "Yes," he said. Grant smiled. "And if someone died in here?" he asked. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. Gideon didn't. "If someone died in here," Gideon said, "we would know exactly what happened." Grant's smile lingered. "Even if it looked like suicide?" he asked. A faint shift moved through the group. It was subtle, but Naomi felt it. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was someone testing the narrative. Gideon's expression didn't change. Especially then, Gideon said. Naomi watched Grant closely. Grant nodded once, satisfied. Good, he said. Because people are going to ask. Miles Quill stepped forward with a smooth laugh. People always ask, he said. That's why we give them answers. Naomi wanted to correct him. The system didn't give answers. It gave data. People gave answers. And people often chose the easiest one. Understood. The demonstration continued. Naomi guided them through scenarios because Gideon insisted that seeing was believing. She triggered a simulated intrusion. A staff member, authorized, pre-registered, attempted to enter through a side door. Orchid responded immediately. Lights brightened. A tone sounded. The door remained sealed. Unauthorized approach detected, Orchid said. Naomi gestured toward a wall display where a clean interface showed the event. Time, location, confidence score, response state. The guests looked impressed. Grant Mercer looked interested. Those were different. Naomi then demonstrated internal monitoring. She had a staff member walk through the hallway. Orchid tracked movement, heat signature, footfall pressure patterns. Occupancy verified, Orchid reported. The system did not say human detected. It said occupancy verified. Naomi noted the phrasing. She had designed it. She still wished Gideon would respect it. Words mattered. Words were where assumptions lived. Understood. At 9:45, the guests drifted toward the terrace for drinks. The night was colder than expected. Wind brushed the trees and made the glass panels tremble faintly. Orchid adjusted internal heating to compensate. Naomi watched Gideon speak with the minister's aide, tone low, confident. She caught fragments. Public-private partnership. National resilience. A domestic pilot program. Politics. Contracts. Big numbers. Evelyn stood nearby, listening without appearing to. Miles moved among guests like a gentle virus, carrying reassurance in every handshake. Grant Mercer stood slightly apart, phone in hand but not filming. He was watching. Naomi's phone buzzed. A system notification. She glanced at it. Orchid. Scheduled calibration cycle begins 23:30. Naomi frowned. She hadn't scheduled that. Calibration cycles were routine, but they weren't automatic. Someone had flagged it. She opened the settings panel quickly. A request had been approved, authorized by Gideon's credentials. Naomi's chest tightened. Gideon had asked for a calibration cycle without telling her. That was unlike him. Or perhaps she realized it was exactly like him. Gideon trusted the system more than the people who built it. If he wanted something, he did it himself. Naomi approached him. Gideon, she said, keeping her voice light. I just saw a calibration cycle scheduled for tonight. Gideon glanced at her. Yes, he said. Why? Naomi asked. Gideon took a sip of his drink. Because we're demonstrating reliability, he said. And reliability includes maintenance. Naomi's jaw tightened. Calibration affects sensor baselines, she said quietly. It changes what the system considers normal. Gideon smiled slightly. Then it will change back, he said. That's the point. Naomi felt irritation flare. You're doing it during guest presence, she said. Gideon shrugged lightly. Guests like transparency, he said. Naomi almost laughed. Guests like narratives, not transparency. But she swallowed the response. Tonight was not the night to argue with Gideon Ashford. Not in public. Not in front of people who needed to keep believing. Understood. By 10:30, the guests began to leave. One by one. Not rushed. Carefully timed. The last ones lingered by the doorway, reluctant to break the spell of being inside a place that promised immunity from randomness. Evelyn hugged the minister's aide lightly. Miles shook hands and promised follow-ups. Grant Mercer approached Gideon last. Impressive, Grant said. Gideon nodded. It's correct, he replied. Grant smiled. Correct systems are still used by humans, he said. Gideon looked at him. Grant held his gaze politely. Good night, Gideon, Grant said. Then he turned and left. Naomi watched him go, unease settling in her chest. Grant had not asked for a tour. He had asked for confirmation. Confirmation that the system would protect Gideon from the consequences of being Gideon. At 11:15, only a few people remained. Naomi packing up. Miles making calls quietly in the corridor. Evelyn upstairs changing into something more comfortable. Gideon alone in his study. The house shifted modes. Lights dimmed in unused rooms. Doors sealed automatically. Sensors adjusted sensitivity. At precisely 11:30, Orchid announced. Calibration cycle initiated. Naomi froze. She looked at her phone. Baseline recalibration. It would take 20 minutes. During that time, the system would adjust its reference points. Temperature, pressure, motion thresholds. The house would still monitor, but it would be learning what normal looked like again. Naomi's stomach tightened. A system learning normal could be tricked. Only briefly. Only by someone who understood what it considered data. Naomi didn't want to imagine anyone in that category. But imagination was part of her job. She walked toward Gideon's study. She knocked. Come, Gideon said. She entered. Gideon sat behind the desk, suit jacket removed, sleeves rolled slightly. His face looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. Naomi cleared her throat. The calibration cycle, she began. Gideon raised a hand. I know, he said. Naomi's voice tightened. It's not advisable to recalibrate at night after high traffic, she said. Footfall patterns, thermal drift. Gideon's eyes narrowed. You're worried about a hypothetical, he said. Naomi took a breath. I'm worried about an edge case, she corrected. Gideon leaned back. Edge cases are why we built Orchid, he said. To handle what humans don't predict. Naomi felt anger flare. Humans predicted Orchid. Humans designed its blind spots. But she swallowed the thought. She tried again. Please, she said quietly. Let me oversee it. Gideon looked at her. For a moment something softened. Not kindness. Recognition. You're protective, he said. Naomi stiffened. I'm responsible, she replied. Gideon nodded. Then be responsible tomorrow, he said. Tonight is done. Naomi held his gaze. You want to sleep in the secure suite? She asked. Gideon nodded. Yes, he said. I want one night where nothing can reach me. Naomi felt a chill. Not because she believed the suite was dangerous, but because Gideon believed it was invulnerable. Belief was always the start of catastrophe. At 11:58, Naomi left the house. Not because she wanted to, because Miles insisted. Go home, he said. You're exhausted. Tomorrow we debrief. Naomi hated leaving, but she also knew that staying would make her look like she didn't trust her own system. And perception, Miles reminded her constantly, was a fragile thing. She stood at the threshold. The front door sealed behind her with no sound. The driveway lights dimmed. Her phone buzzed. Orchid. Calibration cycle complete. Baseline updated. Naomi stared at the notification. Baseline updated. The system had learned the house again. Or thought it had. Naomi stepped into her car, started the engine, and drove away with a sensation she couldn't name. Not fear. Not certainty. An awareness that something had shifted in a way she would not understand until too late. At 12:14 a.m., Gideon Ashford entered the secure suite. He did so alone. The system verified him. Biometrics matched. Heartbeat baseline consistent. Footfall pattern registered as his. The door sealed behind him. Lights softened. White noise activated. A gentle soundscape that hid external noise. Orchid spoke once softly. Secure mode engaged. Gideon removed his watch and placed it on the bedside table. He glanced at the chair by the desk. He sat. He opened his phone and scrolled through messages. Miles had sent one. Great night. Investors impressed. Minister's aide wants follow-up. Evelyn had sent another. Don't stay up too late. Gideon didn't reply. He never replied to messages that implied care. Care was a human variable. He glanced at the control panel embedded in the wall. A small display showed system status. All green. No intrusion. No anomalies. No unpredictability. Gideon leaned back and allowed himself what he rarely permitted. A sense of triumph. He closed his eyes. At 6:03 a.m., Orchid initiated morning routine. Lights rose gradually. Heating adjusted. A soft tone sounded. Good morning, Gideon. No response. Orchid waited, then repeated slightly louder. Good morning, Gideon. Still no response. The system checked his heartbeat sensor. No reading. It checked the chair sensor. No weight shift. It checked thermal arrays. Body temperature below expected human range. Orchid did not panic. It did not feel concern. It initiated protocol. Medical anomaly detected. Initiating alert. It pinged Evelyn first, then Miles, then Naomi, then emergency services. And then it did what it was designed to do. It sealed the house. To preserve evidence. To prevent intrusion. To maintain state. By the time the first police unit arrived, the gates were already locked and the house was already reporting its own innocence. Detective Inspector Rachel Morgan stood outside the front entrance as the sun rose. Her breath fogged in the cold air. A uniformed officer shifted behind her. Rachel stared at the glass facade. The house looked calm. Too calm. She turned to Naomi, who had arrived pale-faced and tightly controlled. Naomi held her laptop like it was an organ. The system confirms no one entered, Naomi said immediately. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Confirms, Rachel repeated. Naomi nodded, almost defensively. Every door and window remained sealed, Naomi said. No motion events. No unauthorized presence. Rachel looked at Miles Quill, who stood slightly to the side, coat buttoned, expression smooth. Miles spoke gently. This is going to be loud, he said. The press is already gathering. Rachel ignored him. She looked at Naomi. Open the door, Rachel said. Naomi hesitated. The system won't open without authorization, she said. Rachel turned toward Evelyn, who had arrived in silence, face composed as if she'd practiced the expression in private. Evelyn's gaze held steady. My husband is dead, she said softly. Open the door. Naomi's fingers moved over the laptop. A biometric prompt appeared. Evelyn placed her hand on a portable scanner. A thin line of light moved across her skin. Verified, Orchid said. The door opened without sound. Rachel stepped inside. The air was warm and too clean. A house that filtered reality. Rachel took a breath. This is going to be called a heart attack, she said quietly. Naomi's head snapped up. What? She asked. Rachel didn't look at her. Rachel looked at the hallway leading toward the secure suite. Because when rooms are too perfect, Rachel said, people stop wanting to imagine a person inside them. She glanced at Naomi. And because everyone wants the house to be the story, Rachel added. Naomi swallowed hard. Rachel continued, voice low. But houses don't kill, she said. And systems don't lie, Naomi whispered. Rachel looked at her. Then she said something Naomi would never forget. Systems don't lie, Rachel agreed. They just answer the question you asked. Rachel started walking. The secure suite awaited. And inside it, behind a door the house swore no one had opened, Gideon Ashford lay dead. A house that refused a crime. Detective Inspector Rachel Morgan had learned to distrust perfect scenes. They always meant someone had arrived before her. Or worse, that no one had. She stood just inside the threshold of the Ashford residence, notebook still closed, hands in her coat pockets, letting the house speak first. The silence was engineered. Not the natural quiet of an empty building, but something filtered, compressed, smoothed. Sound dampeners adjusted in real time, swallowing echoes before they could become questions. Even her breathing felt moderated, as if the air itself had an opinion about how loudly a person should exist. Rachel hated that immediately. Who else has been inside? She asked. Naomi Klein answered too quickly. No one, she said. The system sealed the house after the anomaly was detected. Emergency services were routed through the secondary entrance under supervision. Rachel glanced at her. Under supervision of whom? She asked. Naomi hesitated. Orchid, she said. Rachel nodded slowly. Of course, she replied. The house watched itself. Miles Quill shifted his weight a few steps away, already on his phone, already speaking in half sentences meant to reassure someone who wasn't listening yet. Yes, we're cooperating fully. No, absolutely transparent. It appears to be a medical incident. Rachel turned away from him. She focused on the corridor. Everything was too clean. Not just tidy, neutralized. The smell of cleaning agents hadn't reached her yet, but the air was already stripped of texture. No lingering warmth from bodies. No residual scent of last night's dinner. The house had returned itself to baseline. That bothered her. Baseline was a story. The secure suite door stood open. Rachel paused before entering. She had learned long ago that the last few seconds before seeing a body mattered. They were the only moments when your mind was still yours. She stepped inside. Gideon Ashford sat in the chair by the desk. Not slumped. Not dramatic. Just seated. As if he had stopped mid-thought. Rachel approached slowly, noting details the way muscle memory taught her to. Posture, limb position, environmental context. No overturned furniture. No marks of struggle. No blood. No broken skin. A man who had not fought. Or had not needed to. The medical examiner stood nearby, already documenting. Time of death? Rachel asked. Between 1 and 3, the examiner replied. No signs of trauma. Likely cardiac event. Rachel studied Gideon's face. Eyes closed. Expression neutral. Likely, she repeated. The examiner shrugged slightly. There's no evidence of violence, she said. And the room is sealed. Rachel looked toward Naomi. Sealed how? She asked. Naomi stepped forward, fingers already moving on her laptop. All access points were closed from 11:58 p.m. onward, she said. The system logs confirm it. Rachel nodded. And windows? She asked. Locked, Naomi replied. Ventilation? Rachel asked. Internal circulation only, Naomi said. No external exchange during secure mode. Rachel exhaled slowly. Perfect room. Perfect death. She hated it. Outside, the press gathered faster than Rachel liked. Vans lined the road. Cameras pointed at the gate like weapons waiting for permission. Rachel could already hear the questions forming. Was it the AI? Did the house malfunction? Can technology kill? They would want a monster. And the house was convenient. Rachel turned back to Naomi. Walk me through the last hour, she said. Naomi swallowed. Gideon entered the secure suite at 12:14, she said. Orchid verified him. Secure mode engaged. And after that? Rachel asked. No motion events, Naomi said. No unauthorized presence. No anomaly until the medical alert. Rachel wrote that down. Then she asked the question Naomi had been avoiding. What does Orchid define as presence? Rachel asked. Naomi blinked. Occupancy, she said. Based on motion, heat differential, pressure patterns. Relative to baseline, Rachel finished. Naomi nodded. Yes, she said. Rachel underlined the word. Baseline. Rachel walked the perimeter of the room. She counted steps. She looked at corners. She examined the chair Gideon sat in. The chair was expensive, ergonomic, embedded with sensors. She placed her hand on the armrest. Cold. How does the chair identify the user? Rachel asked. Weight distribution, posture profile, heartbeat signature. Naomi said. It's keyed to Gideon. Rachel's pen paused. So the chair would register Gideon even if... She stopped herself. Even if what? If someone else was there? Rachel finished the thought silently and kept walking. Miles Quill appeared at the doorway. Inspector, he said smoothly. The media is asking for a statement. Rachel didn't look at him. They always are, she said. Miles smiled. We'd prefer to frame this responsibly, he said. Rachel turned. Frame, she repeated. Miles held her gaze. Yes, he said. To avoid unnecessary speculation. Rachel nodded. Speculation thrives in silence, she said. But lies do better in rehearsed statements. Miles's smile tightened. We're not lying, he said. Rachel stepped closer. I didn't say you were, she replied. I said you were early. Miles took a small step back. Rachel turned away. Naomi hovered near the door, tension radiating from her in controlled waves. This system didn't fail, she said suddenly. Rachel looked at her. That's not what I said, Rachel replied. Naomi's voice sharpened. Everyone is going to say it failed, she said. They'll call it a glitch, a bug, or worse, a killer, Rachel finished. Naomi nodded. It's not, she said. Rachel considered her. I don't think houses kill, Rachel said. But I also don't think they absolve. Naomi frowned. What do you mean? She asked. Rachel tapped her notebook. I mean, if I accept your system as a witness, Rachel said. I also accept its blind spots. Naomi stiffened. It doesn't have blind spots, she said. Rachel met her gaze. Everything does, she replied. That's how seeing works. Rachel stepped back into the corridor. She looked once more at Gideon Ashford, a man who believed he had removed human error from his life. Rachel had seen that belief before. In men who trusted alarms more than instincts. In men who outsourced judgment. In men who forgot that systems were built by people who assume too much. She closed her notebook. This isn't a murder yet, Rachel said quietly. Naomi exhaled in relief. Rachel continued. But it's not an accident either, she added. Naomi's relief vanished. Rachel looked toward the front of the house, where the press waited. Right now, Rachel said. This house is innocent. She turned back to Naomi. But innocence isn't proof, she said. It's just the absence of imagination. Rachel walked out. Behind her, Orchid continued to log. No intrusion. No anomaly. No error. The house refused a crime, which meant the crime would have to be found somewhere else. Rachel Morgan did not like interrogations where the witness was flawless. Flawless witnesses didn't hesitate, didn't forget, didn't contradict themselves, and they never changed their minds, which meant they were useless in the ways that mattered most. Naomi Klein set up in the secondary living area, where the walls were bare and the acoustics intentionally dull. The room was designed for engineers, not guests, a space where people spoke to machines instead of each other. She connected her laptop to the house interface. The wall opposite them came alive with a minimalist display. No dramatic graphics. No cinematic timelines. Just data. Rachel stood with her arms crossed, watching Naomi's fingers move. Before you start, Rachel said, I want something clear. Naomi looked up. This system is not on trial, she said flatly. Rachel tilted her head. Everything that speaks during an investigation is on trial, she replied, including people who believe they're not. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She tapped a command. The screen shifted. Orchid event summary. Last 24 hours. 1932. Primary resident arrival. Ashford, Gideon. 20 to 22:47. Authorized guest presence. 22:58. Guest exit final. 23:30. Scheduled calibration cycle initiated. 23:58. Calibration cycle complete. 014 primary resident enters secure suite. 014 secure mode engaged. 603 medical anomaly detected. 603 emergency protocol initiated. Rachel stared at the timeline. So, she said, between 12:14 and 6:03 nothing happened. Naomi nodded. No detectable anomalies, she said. Rachel tapped the screen lightly. What does detectable mean? She asked. Naomi exhaled, the way people did when asked to explain something they believed should be obvious. It means the system observed no deviations from expected parameters, she said. Expected by whom? Rachel asked. Naomi paused. By the system, she said. Rachel smiled faintly. That's a loop, she said. Naomi opened a secondary panel. Look, she said. Motion sensors. Zero activity. Thermal sensors. Only one heat signature consistent with Gideon's baseline. Pressure sensors. Single occupant weight distribution. Rachel leaned in. All matching him, she said. Yes, Naomi replied. Exactly. Rachel nodded. And if someone else had been in the room? She asked. Naomi didn't hesitate. The system would have detected it, she said. Rachel waited a beat. How? She asked. Naomi blinked. Because, she began then stopped herself. Because additional presence changes the environment. Rachel nodded again. And what if the environment was changed first? She asked. Naomi frowned. I don't understand, she said. Rachel shrugged. That's fine, she replied. We're just talking. Rachel moved to the side wall, where a panel glowed faintly. This room, she said, was recalibrated last night. Naomi stiffened. Yes, she said. Routine maintenance. During guest presence, Rachel added. Yes, Naomi said again. Rachel looked at her. Why? She asked. Naomi hesitated. Because the system is designed to self-correct, she said. Calibration ensures accuracy. Rachel raised an eyebrow. And what does it use to define accuracy? She asked. Naomi answered automatically. Baseline environmental data. Rachel nodded. So during calibration, she said slowly, the system learns what normal looks like. Yes, Naomi said. Rachel folded her arms. And last night, she said, normal included a crowded house, elevated temperature, multiple weight distributions, altered airflow, and then, she gestured toward the timeline, a sudden absence of all that. Naomi's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting calibration created vulnerability, she said. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She walked to the secure suite doorway and looked back at Naomi. I'm suggesting calibration creates assumptions, she said. Miles Quill entered quietly, as if he had been listening long before he stepped into the room. Inspector, he said. With respect, we're drifting into hypotheticals. Rachel looked at him. We always do, she said. That's where crimes hide. Miles smiled patiently. There's no evidence of another person, he said. Rachel nodded. Correct, she said. There's evidence of no detection. Miles blinked. Rachel stepped closer. Those aren't the same thing, she said. Rachel turned back to Naomi. Show me the air data, she said. Naomi hesitated. That's not relevant, she said. Rachel's gaze hardened. Everything is relevant when nothing makes sense, she replied. Naomi tapped again. A new graph appeared. CO2 levels, oxygen saturation, humidity. Rachel studied the lines. These are steady, she said. Yes, Naomi replied. Exactly. Rachel pointed. Steady is unusual, she said. Naomi frowned. In a sealed room? Naomi asked. It's expected. Rachel shook her head slightly. In a sealed room with a breathing human, she said. It isn't. Naomi's fingers froze. Rachel continued quietly. A man sleeps, breathes, moves, shifts weight, changes posture. His body heats the air unevenly. She looked at Naomi. Your system saw none of that, Rachel said. Naomi swallowed. It saw Gideon, she said. Rachel tilted her head. Did it, she asked. Or did it see what it expected Gideon to look like? Silence stretched. Miles cleared his throat. This is all very theoretical, he said. Rachel turned on him. No, she said. This is very physical. Rachel requested access to raw sensor data. Not summaries. Not interpretations. Numbers. Naomi hesitated longer this time. That's proprietary, she said. Rachel's voice hardened. A man is dead, she said. Your intellectual property can wait. Miles stepped in. We'll cooperate, he said smoothly. Within reason. Rachel stared at him. You don't get to define reason, she said. I do. Miles opened his mouth. Rachel raised a hand. Later, she said. Not now. Miles closed it. Naomi unlocked deeper access. The wall display filled with dense logs. Rachel didn't read them. She watched Naomi read them. That told her more. Naomi's eyes moved quickly at first. then slower. She stopped, scrolled back, zoomed in. Rachel noticed the change. Found something? Rachel asked. Naomi shook her head too quickly. No, she said. Rachel waited. Naomi swallowed. There's a smoothing function, she said. Rachel leaned in. Smoothing? She asked. Yes, Naomi said. To prevent false positives. Minor fluctuations are normalized. Rachel nodded. Normalized into what? She asked. Naomi hesitated. Into baseline, she said. Rachel's mouth tightened. So if something unusual happened, Rachel said slowly, and it happened gradually enough, it would be treated as normal, Naomi finished. The room went quiet. Miles stared at the screen. Evelyn, who had entered silently, spoke for the first time. You're saying the house learned the wrong thing, she said. Naomi looked at her. No, Naomi said. I'm saying the house learned exactly what it was shown. Rachel straightened. That's not a malfunction, she said. That's obedience. Rachel closed her notebook. She had enough. Not proof, but direction. This stays open, she said. Miles stiffened. You're not calling this a homicide, he said. Rachel looked at him. No, she replied. I'm calling it a lie of convenience. Miles frowned. That's not a legal category, he said. Rachel smiled thinly. It's an investigative one, she replied. She turned to Naomi. I want a full reconstruction, she said. Not of the night. Naomi blinked. Then of what? She asked. Rachel answered calmly. Of what the house thinks a human is, she said. Rachel walked toward the exit. Outside, the press noise rose like surf. Cameras clicked. Questions shouted. Rachel paused at the door. She turned back once more. This house didn't commit a crime, she said. Naomi nodded faintly. But someone taught it how not to see one, Rachel finished. Rachel stepped outside. Behind her, Orchid continued to log. No intrusion. No anomaly. No guilt. And somewhere between those lines, the truth waited. Edward Hale arrived at the Ashford residence without ceremony. No flashing lights. No announcements. No expectation of cooperation. He disliked arriving early in investigations. Early meant emotion was still present. Late meant narratives had already hardened. This moment, 26 hours after Gideon Ashford's death, was ideal. The house had stopped being sacred. It had started becoming inconvenient. Rachel Morgan met him at the gate. She didn't shake his hand immediately. She studied him first. Edward noticed and approved. You look like someone who doesn't believe in accidents, Rachel said. Edward considered that. I believe in accidents, he replied. I don't believe in complete explanations. Rachel smiled faintly. Good, she said. Because this house has too many. They walked together toward the entrance. Edward didn't look at the building at first. He listened. Not to sound. To absence. The quiet wasn't natural. It was managed. This place suppresses randomness, Edward said. Rachel glanced at him. That obvious? She asked. Edward nodded. Most homes absorb noise, he said. This one edits it. Rachel exhaled. That's what I couldn't name, she said. Edward finally looked at the house. Glass. Stone. Balance. A structure designed to feel inevitable. I'm not here to accuse your system, Edward said calmly. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Then what are you here to do? She asked. Edward stopped walking. He looked at her. I'm here to misunderstand it, he said. Naomi Klein was waiting inside. She looked worse than the day before. Not disheveled. Compressed. Like someone who had folded herself too tightly around a belief and couldn't unfold it without tearing. Edward approached her with the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned that engineers and suspects shared one critical trait. They both hated imprecision. Dr. Klein, he said. Edward Hale. Naomi nodded stiffly. I know who you are, she said. Edward inclined his head slightly. Then you know I won't ask you how the system works, he said. Naomi frowned. That's usually the first question, she said. Edward smiled thinly. I'm not interested in how it works, he replied. I'm interested in what it thinks. Naomi's expression hardened. It doesn't think, she said. It processes. Edward nodded. Then we'll start there, he said. They gathered in the secure suite. Edward insisted. If we're going to talk about perception, he said, we do it where perception failed. Rachel watched him closely as he entered the room. Edward didn't approach the body's former position. He walked the perimeter instead. Slowly, counting steps, watching light change across surfaces. He stopped by the wall panel Naomi had shown Rachel earlier. Show me nothing, Edward said. Naomi blinked. What? She asked. Show me what Orchid saw, Edward clarified. Not what you think it means. Naomi hesitated, then tapped her laptop. The wall display came alive. Raw sensor feeds. Numbers. Graphs. Logs without interpretation. Edward leaned forward slightly. This is honest, he said. Naomi stiffened. It's always honest, she replied. Edward didn't argue. He studied the data. Edward began with heat. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was lazy. Thermal sensors don't detect bodies, Edward said calmly. They detect contrast. Naomi nodded automatically. Yes, she said. Edward pointed at the graph. And last night, he continued, this room had almost no contrast. Naomi frowned. That's because the system adjusted climate control, she said. Edward smiled faintly. Exactly, he said. Rachel leaned in. What does that mean? She asked. Edward answered without looking away from the data. It means the house worked very hard to make the room thermally boring, he said. Naomi bristled. That's efficiency, she said. Edward tilted his head. Efficiency for whom? He asked. Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it. Edward continued. A human body is messy, he said. Uneven heat. Micro-movements. Shifts. He tapped the screen. This room saw none of that, he said. Naomi crossed her arms. It saw Gideon, she said. Edward nodded. No, he corrected gently. It saw Gideon as expected. Rachel felt a chill. Edward wasn't accusing the system. He was redefining it. Edward moved to pressure sensors next. The floor beneath them was expensive hardwood. Beneath that, a lattice of sensors calibrated to weight and gait. These are tuned to Gideon's body, Edward said. Naomi nodded. Yes, she said. To identify him. Edward looked at her. To recognize him, he corrected. Identification implies choice. Recognition implies pattern matching. Naomi's jaw tightened. Edward continued. If someone else entered this room, he said, and distributed their weight carefully, they couldn't replicate Gideon's gait, Naomi said sharply. Edward smiled. They wouldn't need to, he replied. They'd only need to avoid creating a second pattern. Silence. Rachel frowned. You're saying the system can't count? She asked. Edward shook his head. It can count events, he said. Not intentions. Edward stepped toward the chair. May I? He asked. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. Edward sat. The chair adjusted automatically. Subtle shifts. Edward felt it mold around him. Interesting, he murmured. What? Naomi asked. Edward leaned back. The chair is not asking who I am, he said. It's asking how close I am to Gideon. Naomi stiffened. That's not, she began. It's brilliant, Edward continued. And dangerous. He stood again. If someone else were present, Edward said, and Gideon was already here. Rachel's eyes widened. The system would still think it was one person, she said. Edward nodded. If the environment didn't change enough, he said. Naomi's voice was tight. That assumes a level of control, she began. That someone with access to physics could manage, Edward finished. Edward turned to air sensors. CO2 levels, humidity, oxygen saturation. These are too stable, he said. Naomi shook her head. It's a sealed room, she said. Edward looked at her. With a breathing man, he said quietly. Rachel swallowed. Edward continued. Breathing is noisy, he said. Chemically, rhythmically. He tapped the graph. This line is calm, he said. Almost curated. Naomi stared. That's impossible, she said. Edward met her gaze. Only if you assume the air was passive, he said. Edward stepped back. He looked around the room again. This time he imagined it differently. Not as a space, as a model. The house doesn't see people, Edward said slowly. It sees deviations. Naomi didn't argue. Rachel listened. If deviations are gradual, Edward continued, they become baseline. Naomi's breath hitched. Edward turned to her. You recalibrated last night, he said. Naomi nodded. Yes, she whispered. Edward nodded too. And someone knew you would, he said. Rachel leaned against the wall. So, she said slowly, you're telling me the house told the truth. Edward smiled faintly. Of course it did, he said. It just told it in its own language. Rachel frowned. And we didn't speak it, she said. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. We assumed it spoke ours. Edward closed his notebook. We're not looking for a hacker, he said. Naomi's eyes snapped up. Then what are we looking for? She asked. Edward answered calmly. Someone who understands how to stand in a room, he said, without being seen by the room. The silence that followed was heavier than fear, because fear suggested something extraordinary. This was not. This was method. Edward walked toward the door. We're going to rebuild the night, he said. Rachel nodded. How? She asked. Edward paused. Not from logs, he said. From physics. He looked at Naomi. And from the people who understand where the house stops looking, he added. Naomi swallowed. That's everyone who built it, she said. Edward shook his head. No, he said quietly. That's everyone who maintained it. Edward Hale had never trusted systems that claimed to eliminate human error. They never eliminated it. They relocated it. He stood in the service corridor behind the main living wing, a place the guests had never seen and the press would never photograph. The walls here were plain, the lighting functional, the floors slightly scuffed, a corridor designed not to impress, but to be forgotten. This is where the house admits it's human, Edward said. Rachel glanced around. This doesn't look like a door, she said. Edward smiled faintly. Maintenance never does, he replied. Naomi walked ahead of them, shoulders tight. This area is restricted, she said. Only authorized personnel. Edward nodded. Authorized how? He asked. Naomi hesitated. Role-based access, she said. Time-limited. Logged. Edward stopped. Logged, he repeated. Naomi turned. Yes, she said. Everything is logged. Edward held her gaze. And who reads those logs? He asked. Naomi opened her mouth. Closed it. Rachel watched the exchange carefully. Who? Rachel asked again. Naomi exhaled. Usually no one, she admitted. Unless there's an alert. Edward nodded. There wasn't, he said. They reached a small panel recessed into the wall. Naomi pressed her palm against it. The panel slid open silently. Inside was a compact control interface: diagnostics, access history, system health. Edward leaned in. Show me service windows, he said. Naomi's fingers moved. A list appeared. Short. Routine. Unremarkable. Edward studied the timestamps. Who scheduled the calibration cycle? He asked. Naomi swallowed. Gideon, she said. Edward nodded. And who approved it? He asked. Naomi hesitated. The system auto-approved, she said. Based on his credentials. Edward smiled faintly. Of course it did, he said. Rachel frowned. So Gideon unlocked his own house, she said. Edward shook his head. No, he said. He unlocked assumptions. Edward scrolled further. Who else had access last night? He asked. Naomi frowned. No one entered the secure suite, she said quickly. Edward didn't look up. I didn't ask about the suite, he said. I asked about the house. Naomi's fingers froze. Rachel leaned closer. Show it, Rachel said. Naomi scrolled. A name appeared. Then another. Then another. Cleaning staff. Catering. Maintenance subcontractor. All logged earlier in the day. All cleared before secure mode. Edward's gaze fixed on one line. Who is this? He asked. Naomi followed his finger. A single entry. Environmental Systems Support. External. Timestamp. 1812 to 1837. Naomi frowned. That's standard, she said. They check airflow, filtration, humidity calibration. Edward nodded. Before guests arrived, he said. Yes, Naomi replied. Edward leaned back. And what do they check after? He asked. Naomi shook her head. Nothing, she said. Once secure mode is armed, external systems are isolated. Edward smiled. Isolation is a theory, he said. In practice, it's a schedule. Edward walked deeper into the corridor. He stopped near a vent access panel. This duct, he said. Where does it lead? Naomi checked. Secondary circulation loop, she said. Internal only. Edward crouched. He placed his hand near the vent. Cool air brushed his skin. Active, he murmured. Rachel watched him. You're thinking about air again, she said. Edward nodded. Air is movement without footsteps, he said. Naomi's voice tightened. The system would detect airflow anomalies, she said. Edward looked up at her. Only if it expects them, he replied. Edward stood. Let's talk about people the system ignores, he said. Rachel frowned. Ignore? She asked. Edward nodded. Background personnel, he said. People classified as non-events. Naomi stiffened. No one is ignored, she said. Everyone is authenticated. Edward tilted his head. And once authenticated, he asked. Naomi hesitated. They're normalized, she said. Edward smiled thinly. Exactly, he said. Edward explained patiently. Like a teacher who knew the student was intelligent but defensive. Your system is trained to notice deviations, he said. A stranger triggers alarms. An anomaly triggers alerts. Rachel nodded slowly. But someone expected doesn't, she said. Edward smiled. Someone expected becomes noise, he said. Naomi's jaw clenched. That doesn't mean they're invisible, she said. Edward shrugged. It means they're discounted, he replied. Edward pulled out his notebook. Who maintained environmental systems? He asked. Naomi answered reluctantly. A rotating subcontractor, she said. Vetted. Cleared. Edward raised an eyebrow. Cleared how? He asked. Naomi exhaled. Criminal background. Credentials. Work history. Edward nodded. And psychology? He asked. Naomi stared at him. We don't vet psychology, she said. Edward closed his notebook. Then you should, he replied. Rachel crossed her arms. You think the killer was maintenance, she said. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. I think maintenance was the mask. Rachel frowned. Explain, she said. Edward gestured around them. This house recognizes roles, he said. Not intentions. Naomi swallowed. Edward continued. Someone who understands which roles flatten detection, he said, can move without becoming an event. Rachel felt a chill. So the killer didn't sneak in, she said. Edward nodded. They blended, he replied. Edward turned back to the interface. Show me who supervised environmental systems support, he said. Naomi's fingers moved again. A name appeared. Facility Operations Liaison Thomas Reed. Rachel glanced at Naomi. Who's that? She asked. Naomi hesitated. Internal Operations, she said. Coordinates contractors. Edward underlined the name. Has he been questioned? He asked. Rachel shook her head. He's not on the list, she said. No access to the secure suite. Edward nodded. Of course not, he said. He didn't need it. Edward stepped away from the panel. We've been asking the wrong question, he said. Rachel frowned. What question? She asked. Edward answered calmly. How did someone enter the room? Rachel nodded. That seems reasonable, she said. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. The right question is, how did someone stop the room from noticing it had changed? Naomi felt something cold settle in her chest. Edward looked at her. Your system doesn't ask, is there a second person? he said. It asks, is the environment still acceptable? Naomi whispered. And it was, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. Because someone made sure it was. Rachel leaned against the wall. So this wasn't brute force, she said. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. It was choreography. Rachel looked at the corridor again. The vents. The panels. The forgotten spaces. Then the killer had time, she said. Edward nodded. And permission, he added. Edward closed his notebook again. We're not done here, he said. Rachel looked at him. What's next? She asked. Edward answered without hesitation. We find out who understands the house well enough to disappear inside it, he said. Naomi swallowed. That's a long list, she said. Edward looked at her. It just got shorter, he replied. Edward Hale used the word background carefully. It was not an insult. It was a classification. And classifications killed more people than knives ever had. They sat in a small conference room near the rear of the house, a room that had no windows and no aesthetic ambition. It existed for one reason only: coordination. Naomi had brought files. Printed ones. Edward noticed and approved. When people were afraid, they trusted paper more than screens. These are everyone who had routine access in the last 6 months, Naomi said. Staff, contractors, vendors. Edward leafed through the folders slowly. Rachel watched his hands. He didn't skim. He absorbed. Names, photos, roles, duration of access. This list is too long, Edward said eventually. Naomi stiffened. That's reality, she replied. Edward shook his head. No, he said. That's coverage. Reality is always smaller. Rachel leaned forward. Explain, she said. Edward tapped the table lightly. Most people with access are still events, he said. The system notices them, tracks them, revalidates them. He flipped a page. But some people stop being events, he continued. They become part of the environment. Naomi frowned. That doesn't make sense, she said. Edward looked at her. It makes perfect sense, he replied. It's how your own eyes work. Edward stood and walked to the wall. He pointed to a smoke detector. How often do you notice that? He asked. Naomi followed his finger. Never, she said. Edward nodded. But if it were gone, he said, you'd notice immediately. Rachel felt the point land. Background, she said quietly. Edward turned back. Background isn't invisible, he said. It's unquestioned. Edward returned to the files. He separated them into 2 stacks. This pile, he said, are people who would trigger attention if they acted out of sequence. He pushed it aside. And this pile, he continued, tapping the second stack, are people whose presence is the sequence. Rachel looked at the second stack. It was smaller. Noticeably. Naomi leaned forward. Who are they? She asked. Edward slid the top file toward her. Facilities staff. Environmental systems support. Night cycle maintenance. People who normalize the house, Edward said. People whose job is to make things feel unchanged. Naomi's voice was tight. They're vetted, she said. They don't have access to private spaces. Edward nodded. They don't need it, he replied. Edward focused on one file. Thomas Reed, Facility Operations Liaison, middle-aged. Unremarkable photo. Employment history clean. No criminal record. Rachel studied the picture. He looks like everyone, she said. Edward nodded. That's why he matters, he replied. Rachel pulled Reed's file closer. Talk me through his role, she said. Naomi sighed. He coordinates contractors, she said. Schedules maintenance. Oversees compliance. Edward interjected. And ensures that the house remains predictable, he said. Naomi nodded reluctantly. Yes, she said. Edward leaned back. Predictability is camouflage, he said. Rachel frowned. How? She asked. Edward answered evenly. When nothing unexpected happens, he said, you stop checking. Edward requested personnel logs. Not access logs. Human logs. Shift changes. Call records. Meeting schedules. Naomi pulled them up. Edward studied Reed's timeline. He left at 1900, Naomi said, before guests arrived. Edward nodded. That's when the system logged him, he said. Rachel tilted her head. Logged? She asked. Edward smiled faintly. Yes, he replied. The moment he became visible. Edward walked toward the windowless wall again. Tell me, he said. When does someone stop being a person and start being a process? Naomi didn't answer. Rachel did. When you trust them, she said. Edward nodded. And when does trust become blindness? He asked. Rachel swallowed. When it's routine, she replied. Edward returned to the files. Reed didn't need to enter the secure suite, he said. He didn't need to be present at the moment of death. Naomi frowned. Then what did he do? She asked. Edward answered quietly. He prepared the room, he said. Rachel felt a chill. Edward sketched a rough diagram on the whiteboard. Not technical. Conceptual. Calibration window. Environmental normalization. Baseline smoothing. Whoever did this, Edward said, didn't kill Gideon. Naomi looked up sharply. Edward continued. They removed the room's ability to protest, he said. They made death quiet. Rachel stared at the board. You're saying the system was trained not to notice, she said. Edward nodded. Trained is too strong, he replied. Conditioned is better. Naomi's voice shook slightly. This would require access, timing, and understanding, she said. Edward nodded. And invisibility, he added. Rachel looked back at Reed's photo. He's still background, she said. Edward shook his head. Not anymore, he replied. Now he's contrast. Edward closed the folders. We don't arrest him, he said. Rachel frowned. Then what do we do? She asked. Edward's eyes were calm. We let him do what background people always do, he said. We let him continue. Naomi stiffened. That's dangerous, she said. Edward nodded. So is pretending he doesn't exist, he replied. Edward stood. We need to recreate the night, he said. Rachel nodded. How? She asked. Edward answered without hesitation. We put someone in the house, he said, who the system already knows how to ignore. Naomi's breath caught. You can't, she said. Edward looked at her. We already did, he replied. Naomi stared. Edward clarified. You, he said. Silence fell hard. Rachel turned to Naomi. He means you don't trigger alarms, she said. Naomi shook her head slowly. That's not, she began. Edward interrupted gently. You're trusted, he said. You're normalized. The house expects you. Naomi felt something sink. Edward continued. And if you can move without becoming an event, he said, so could someone else. Edward picked up his coat. This chapter isn't about guilt, he said. It's about permission. Rachel nodded slowly. And someone had it, she said. Edward met her gaze. Yes, he replied. And they used it to make murder look like maintenance. Edward Hale did not like experiments that tried to prove everything at once. They failed theatrically. He preferred small demonstrations. Ones that didn't shout. Ones that made people uncomfortable because they were too quiet to dismiss. We're not recreating the death, Edward said. Rachel looked at him sharply. Then what are we recreating? She asked. Edward adjusted his cuff, a small habitual gesture he made when the room was listening. We're recreating invisibility, he replied. Naomi felt her pulse spike. That's reckless, she said. If the system misinterprets. It already does, Edward said calmly. We're just going to show you how. They chose the guest bedroom adjacent to the secure suite. Not identical. Close enough. Edward insisted on that. Perfect replicas reassure, he said. Near misses reveal. Naomi stood in the center of the room, tablet in hand. Rachel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Edward positioned himself by the door. Baseline? Edward asked. Naomi checked. Stable, she said. Room unoccupied. Edward nodded. Good, he said. Now Naomi enters. Naomi frowned. I'm already here, she said. Edward smiled. Then the system already expects you, he replied. Naomi swallowed. She stepped forward deliberately. Orchid responded instantly. Authorized presence detected, the system said softly. Naomi exhaled. Edward raised a finger. Stop, he said. He turned to Rachel. What did it say? He asked. Rachel frowned. Authorized presence, she said. Edward nodded. Not new presence, he said. Not additional presence. Rachel's jaw tightened. Edward turned back to Naomi. Sit, he said. Naomi hesitated, then sat in the chair near the desk. The system adjusted lighting subtly. Pressure sensors registered. Thermal profile stabilized. Edward watched the wall display. All green, Naomi said. Edward nodded. Good, he replied. Now don't move. Edward stepped into the room. Slowly, deliberately. He moved close to the wall, minimizing disturbance. Rachel held her breath. Naomi stared straight ahead, pulse pounding. Edward stopped 2 meters behind her. Nothing happened. No alert. No tone. No change in the display. Rachel's voice was barely audible. It didn't see you, she said. Edward didn't smile. Not yet, he replied. Edward shifted his weight. Carefully. He placed his foot exactly where Naomi's foot had been moments earlier. The pressure sensors adjusted. Still no alert. Edward leaned closer. He could feel Naomi's presence now. Human warmth. Breath. He raised his hand slowly. Nothing. Rachel stared at the display. Still green. Still calm. Still innocent. This is impossible, Naomi whispered. Edward answered softly. It's expected, he said. Edward stepped back. The system remained unchanged. Explain it, Rachel said. Edward turned. The system doesn't count people, he said. It counts deviation. Naomi swallowed hard. And you didn't deviate enough, she said. Edward nodded. Because the environment was already normalized around you, he replied. Edward left the room. The moment he crossed the threshold, Orchid spoke. Room unoccupied. Rachel felt a chill. Naomi stood abruptly. That's, she began, then stopped. She looked at Edward. You were there, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. And the house disagreed. Rachel rubbed her temples. So someone could have been in the secure suite, she said slowly. As long as Gideon was already there? Edward nodded. If they moved like background, he said. Naomi shook her head. That still doesn't explain death, she said. It explains presence. Edward's eyes sharpened. Presence was never the hard part, he said. Edward requested a second demonstration. Change the light, he said. Naomi hesitated. Why? She asked. Edward answered simply. Light defines edges, he said. Naomi dimmed the lights incrementally. Edward stepped back into the room again. This time the system flickered. A brief recalibration. Then silence. Rachel leaned forward. What happened? She asked. Edward pointed. It almost noticed, he said. Naomi stared at the display. There was a micro-adjustment, she said. The smoothing function suppressed it. Edward nodded. Exactly, he said. The system corrected reality. Edward stepped fully beside Naomi now, close enough that Rachel felt uncomfortable watching. Still no alert. Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. It thinks you're furniture, she said. Edward corrected her. No, he said. It thinks I'm irrelevant. Edward stepped away again. This time he exaggerated his movement. A sudden shift. A sharp step. Orchid responded immediately. Anomaly detected. Lights brightened. A tone sounded. Rachel exhaled sharply. So it can see you, she said. Edward nodded. When I behave like an event, he said. Edward closed his notebook. That's enough, he said. Naomi looked shaken. This changes everything, she said. Edward met her gaze. No, he replied. It confirms it. Rachel leaned against the wall, mind racing. So whoever killed Gideon, she said, didn't sneak in. Edward nodded. They entered like dust, he said. Rachel frowned. And then what? She asked. Edward's voice lowered. Then they did something that didn't register as violence, he replied. Naomi looked sick. The house didn't record a struggle, she said. Edward nodded. Because there wasn't one, he said. At least, not the kind it understands. Edward turned toward the secure suite. We've proven one thing, he said. Rachel nodded. What? She asked. Edward answered quietly. The house can be occupied by two people and swear it was one, he said. Naomi whispered. And if the second person leaves carefully, Edward finished for her. The house will remember only what it prefers, he said. Edward walked toward the exit. Rachel followed. What now? She asked. Edward didn't stop walking. Now, he said. We look for a method of killing that looks like no change at all. Rachel felt the weight of that. Not a fight, not a weapon, not an intrusion, just a death that the room experienced as continuity. Edward Hale lingered in the doorway of the secure suite longer than necessary. He was not looking at the place where Gideon Ashford sat. He was looking at the room as if it were a conversational partner, not a witness, a participant. Any system, Edward said without turning around, has an idea of what constitutes an acceptable change. Rachel nodded. Temperature fluctuates, he went on. Light shifts. Pressure drifts slightly. A human breathes. He turned. Death is also a change, he said. The question is how abrupt it is. Naomi went pale. They were seated at the table in the adjoining room, where demonstration materials had once been laid out. Now there were printouts of data. Edward arranged them carefully, the way a physician lays out instruments. We won't be looking for a weapon, he said, because a weapon is an event. Rachel frowned. Then what? She asked. Edward replied calmly. Processes. He took the first sheet. A heart attack, he said. A system's favorite ending. Naomi jerked her head up. You can't. Edward raised his hand. I'm not asserting, he said. I'm checking whether it fits the house. He studied the charts. A sharp spike in pulse? He continued. Yes. A drop? Yes. Temperature change? Minimal. He looked at Naomi. The room expects that a person may die, he said. It simply doesn't expect it to be interesting. Rachel felt her fingers grow cold. Edward set the sheet aside. Now asphyxiation, he said. Slow. Naomi tensed. The air sensors. See trends, Edward cut in. Not intentions. He traced a finger along the CO2 graph. If the level changes gradually, he said, it becomes the new normal. Naomi whispered. The room adapts. Edward nodded. The room grows accustomed, he corrected. Rachel swallowed. And the struggle? She asked. Panic? Movement? Edward looked at her. You're assuming the victim knew they were being killed, he said. Rachel froze. Edward took the third sheet. Medication, he said. Not an overdose. He looked at Naomi. Microdosing, he clarified. Naomi went even paler. That would look like. Like sleep, Edward finished. Like fatigue. Like failure. He tapped the table. The room doesn't become alarmed when a person falls asleep. Edward leaned back. This is what matters, he said. The killer did not choose a method that kills a person. He paused. He chose a method that does not disturb the room. Silence fell heavily. Rachel ran a hand over her face. So, she said slowly, if death occurs as a continuation. Edward nodded. The room considers it normal, she finished. Naomi stared at a single point. We optimized the system for comfort, she said dully. We eliminated sharp changes. Edward looked at her more gently than before. You eliminated screams, he said. Rooms never like screams. Rachel stood up. Are you saying, she asked, that Gideon died peacefully? Edward did not answer at once. He died unnoticed, he said at last. That is not the same thing. Naomi closed her eyes. Then why now? She asked. Why that night? Edward looked at her closely. Because the house was ready, he said. And because someone knew when it would be ready. Rachel understood. Calibration, she said. Edward nodded. A window, he said. Brief. Clean. Edward gathered the papers. The chapter is closed, he said. Rachel blinked. What? She asked. We haven't proved anything yet. Edward looked at her. We've proved the essential thing, he said. It wasn't an error. Rachel stiffened. And not an accident, she added. Edward nodded. It was the room's consent, he said. And someone's knowledge of how to obtain it. Naomi whispered. We built a house that knows how not to notice death. Edward looked at her. No, he said. You built a house that knows how not to notice intent. Rachel headed for the exit. What's next? She asked. Edward answered without hesitation. Now we're not looking for someone who could kill, he said, but for someone who knew when the house would become deaf. He opened the door. And there are always fewer such people than it seems. Edward Hale believed that access was overrated. Most crimes did not require permission. They required timing. He began where timing lived. Not in doors. Not in locks. Not even in systems. In calendars. The conference room at Ashford Systems headquarters smelled faintly of coffee and restraint. It was the kind of room designed to make conflict feel inappropriate. Frosted glass. Muted colors. Chairs engineered to be comfortable enough to sit, uncomfortable enough not to stay long. Edward sat at the far end of the table, notebook closed. Rachel Morgan stood by the window, watching rain slide down the glass in thin, nervous lines. Miles Quill arrived last, as he always did. Thank you for coming, Miles said, tone perfectly calibrated. I assume this is about clarification. Edward looked up. No, he said. It's about sequence. Miles smiled politely. Sequence, he repeated. Edward nodded. Yes, he said. Who knew when things would happen? Edward didn't start with the night of the murder. That would have been obvious. He started 3 weeks earlier. Who scheduled the calibration cycle? Edward asked. Miles answered immediately. Gideon, he said. Personally. Edward wrote it down. And who suggested it? Edward asked. Miles paused. Suggested, he echoed. Yes, Edward said. Ideas rarely originate in isolation. Miles smiled. Routine maintenance, he said. It's standard practice. Edward nodded. Standards, he said, are usually invented by someone. Rachel turned from the window. Who? She asked. Miles spread his hands. The systems team, he said. Engineering. Edward made a note. Edward requested calendars. Not system logs. Human calendars. Executive schedules. Facilities planning. PR timelines. Security briefings. Miles hesitated. That's sensitive, he said. Rachel met his gaze. So is homicide, she replied. Miles sighed softly. We'll cooperate, he said. Edward noticed the phrasing. Cooperate, not comply. The data arrived in layers. Edward spread it across the table like a map. Lines intersected. Meetings overlapped. Calls clustered. Edward ignored most of it. He was looking for anticipation. People who prepared for things before they were announced. He found the first anomaly quickly. A facilities planning meeting, held 10 days before the dinner. Not unusual. What was unusual was its length. 90 minutes. For routine maintenance. Edward circled it. Who attended this? He asked. Naomi Klein leaned forward. Facilities. Environmental systems. Operations, she said. Edward nodded. And Gideon? He asked. Naomi shook her head. No, she said. He doesn't attend those. Edward underlined that. People who control timing rarely attend the meetings where timing is set. Edward scanned the attendee list. One name appeared again. Thomas Reed. Facility Operations Liaison. Edward tapped the name lightly. This man appears often, he said. Naomi stiffened. He coordinates, she said. Edward nodded. Coordination is influence, he replied. Rachel watched the pattern emerge. Reed didn't decide, she said slowly. He aligned. Edward smiled faintly. Yes, he said. Alignment is harder to detect than decision. Edward moved to communications. Emails. Calendar invites. Just checking in. Flagging for awareness. Language stripped of command. Miles leaned back. This is how companies function, he said. No one orders. They suggest. Edward looked at him. Suggestions move time, he said. Edward found the second anomaly. A phone call. 17 minutes. Late evening. Between Reed and Miles Quill. 2 days before the dinner. Rachel frowned. That's not normal, she said. Miles met her gaze calmly. I handle communications risk, he said. Facilities affect perception. Edward nodded. And what did you discuss? He asked. Miles smiled slightly. Contingencies, he said. Edward wrote it down. Contingencies. A word that meant we expect something. Edward leaned back. So, he said. By the time Gideon scheduled calibration, the idea already existed. Naomi swallowed. Edward continued. And by the time the dinner was announced, multiple people already knew the house would recalibrate that night. Rachel felt it click. They didn't need to know the murder, she said. They just needed to know the window. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. Timing doesn't require intent. It requires availability. Edward stood. He walked to the whiteboard. He drew a horizontal line. This is the night, he said. Then vertical markers. Calibration start. Calibration end. Secure mode. Isolation. This, Edward said, tapping the narrow space between two markers, is the quietest moment the house will ever experience. Rachel stared. And someone knew it, she said. Edward nodded. And someone planned around it. Edward turned back to Miles. Who else knew? He asked. Miles hesitated. Legal, he said. Security. Edward nodded. And Evelyn? He asked. Miles paused. Gideon discussed most things with her, he said. Edward wrote her name. Rachel frowned. She benefits from his death, she said. Edward raised a hand. Benefit is not timing, he said. Let's not rush. Edward requested Evelyn Ashford's calendar. Miles hesitated longer this time. She's not an employee, he said. Rachel stepped forward. She's a witness, she said. Miles nodded slowly. I'll ask, he said. Edward noticed he didn't say provide. Edward shifted focus. Who knew Gideon would sleep in the secure suite that night? He asked. Naomi answered quietly. No one, she said. He decided late. Edward looked at her. Late to whom? He asked. Naomi hesitated. To us, she said. Edward nodded. But not to himself, he said. Edward found the third anomaly. A wellness report. Automatically generated. Flagged elevated stress. Generated by Orchid. Sent to Gideon. Copied to Evelyn. Edward underlined it. The house warned them, Rachel said. Edward nodded. About vulnerability, he said. Edward closed his notebook. We're not dealing with a conspiracy, he said. Rachel looked up. Then what? She asked. Edward answered evenly. A convergence, he said. A set of people who didn't plan a death, he continued, but arranged a moment where death would pass unnoticed. Silence fell. Edward looked at the whiteboard again. Timing is power, he said. Rachel nodded. And someone had it, she said. Edward corrected her gently. Several people shared it, he said. Which is why none of them feel guilty. Edward gathered his papers. This chapter isn't about arrest, he said. Rachel frowned. Then what is it? She asked. Edward looked at her. It's about narrowing, he said. Because the person we're looking for doesn't think of themselves as a killer. Rachel felt a chill. What do they think? She asked. Edward replied quietly. A scheduler. Edward Hale did not believe killers woke up thinking about murder. They woke up thinking about problems. And problems, when approached methodically, often ended in corpses. Evelyn Ashford received them in the smaller sitting room overlooking the garden. She had chosen it deliberately. Not the main living space. Not the study. A neutral room where nothing had happened. Edward noticed immediately. She wore black, but not mourning black. Strategic black. Her posture was composed. Her voice controlled. Her grief perfectly paced. Not false. Managed. I've answered these questions already, Evelyn said calmly. Rachel nodded. We'll try not to repeat them, she said. Edward didn't sit right away. He walked to the window. The garden outside was immaculate. Trimmed. Balanced. Alive but disciplined. Mrs. Ashford, Edward said, still facing the glass, do you believe in inevitability? Evelyn glanced at Rachel, then back at Edward. I believe in preparation, she said. Edward smiled faintly. Most people who believe in inevitability do, he replied. Edward turned. Did you know about the calibration cycle? He asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That wasn't in your earlier statement, she said. Evelyn folded her hands. I wasn't asked, she replied. Edward nodded. And when did you learn about it? He asked. Evelyn considered. Earlier that day, she said. Gideon mentioned it in passing. Edward tilted his head. What did he say? He asked. Evelyn's eyes flickered briefly. That the house needed to reset after the demonstration, she said. Edward wrote that down. Reset. A word people used when they wanted to make change sound harmless. Edward shifted. Did he express concern? He asked. Evelyn shook her head. No, she said. He trusted the system. Edward nodded. Did you? He asked. Evelyn met his gaze. I trusted Gideon, she said. Edward didn't correct her. Trust was often misplaced by 1 degree. Edward changed direction. Did Gideon discuss stress with you? He asked. Evelyn sighed softly. He was always under stress, she said. That's what leadership is. Edward nodded. And that night? He asked. Evelyn paused. He was tired, she said. Satisfied. He believed the evening had gone well. Edward wrote that down. Satisfied. People who died satisfied rarely chose it. Edward closed his notebook. One more question, he said. Evelyn nodded. Who did you speak to after Gideon went to bed? Edward asked. Evelyn frowned. I don't remember exactly, she said. I sent a few messages. Edward waited. To whom? He asked. Evelyn hesitated. Miles, she said. Logistics. Edward nodded. Rachel made a note. Miles Quill did not look surprised when Edward requested a second meeting. He looked annoyed. That was progress. They met in his office at Ashford Systems headquarters. Miles closed the door himself. That house is becoming a liability, he said. Edward nodded. It always was, he replied. Miles frowned. What do you want? He asked. Edward sat. I want to understand your calendar, he said. Miles smiled tightly. My calendar is full, he replied. Edward nodded. So is your influence, he said. Edward laid out the timeline again. 2 days before the dinner, he said. You spoke to Thomas Reed. Miles nodded. Yes, he said. About contingencies, Edward added. Miles's smile thinned. Yes, he repeated. Edward leaned forward slightly. What contingency? He asked. Miles held his gaze. Media, he said. If something went wrong. Edward nodded. And what was something? He asked. Miles shrugged. Embarrassment, he said. Edward smiled faintly. Embarrassment is rarely fatal, he replied. Miles's jaw tightened. It can be, he said. Edward shifted again. Did you discuss calibration? He asked. Miles hesitated. We discussed reliability, he said. Edward wrote it down. Reliability. A word people used when they wanted time to behave. Edward leaned back. You didn't plan a death, Edward said calmly. Miles stared at him. You planned a window, Edward continued. A quiet period. A reset. Miles exhaled slowly. You're implying intent, he said. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. I'm implying foresight. Edward stood. Last question, he said. Miles nodded. Who benefits from the house being unquestioned? Edward asked. Miles answered without thinking. Everyone, he said. Edward smiled. Exactly, he replied. Thomas Reed arrived last. He didn't know he was a suspect. That was obvious immediately. He sat stiffly in the chair opposite Edward, hands folded, eyes wary. "I've been cooperating," Reed said. Edward nodded. "Yes," he replied. "Perfectly." Reed frowned. "That sounds like a compliment," he said. Edward tilted his head. "It's an observation," he replied. Edward opened Reed's file. "You were present the day of the demonstration," Edward said. "Yes," Reed replied. "Earlier. You supervised environmental systems," Edward continued. "Yes." "You understood calibration," Edward said. "Yes." "You left before guests arrived," Edward said. "Yes." Edward closed the file. "And you were never seen again," he said. Reed's brow furrowed. "I wasn't required to be," he said. Edward nodded. "That's the point," he replied. Edward leaned forward. "You didn't enter the secure suite," he said. Reed nodded. "No," he said. Edward smiled faintly. "You didn't need to," he replied. Reed swallowed. Edward continued. "You prepared a room where nothing dramatic would register," he said. "You didn't kill Gideon Ashford." Reed's eyes widened. Edward's voice remained calm. "You made sure the house wouldn't notice when someone else did." Silence stretched. Reed finally spoke. "I followed protocol," he said. Edward nodded. "Protocol is the most dangerous alibi," he replied. Edward closed his notebook. "We're not arresting anyone today," he said. Rachel frowned. "But we're close," she said. Edward nodded. "We're closer to understanding," he replied. "And understanding is what forces mistakes." Edward stood. "They prepared time," he said. "Now we wait to see who panics when time turns against them." Edward Hale never rushed an investigation, but he knew exactly when to let others rush themselves. Pressure did not come from accusations. It came from deadlines. The first leak appeared 48 hours later. Not a document. Not a name. A phrase. Sources close to the investigation suggest the Ashford residents may have failed to detect critical environmental anomalies. It was vague, careful, irreversible. Rachel read it on her phone while standing outside a cafe, rain misting her coat. "Someone wants this finished," she said. Edward nodded. "They always do," he replied. Ashford Systems responded within the hour. A statement polished and neutral. "There is no evidence of system failure. Independent experts confirm full compliance with safety protocols." Edward smiled faintly. "Independent," he repeated. Rachel snorted. "Paid," she said. Edward didn't disagree. Inside the corporation, calendars began to compress. Meetings were moved forward. Reviews were expedited. Language shifted. "Not when we conclude, but when we clarify." Not ongoing investigation, but final assessment. Edward watched the changes quietly. This was his favorite stage. When people began to reveal what they feared by how quickly they tried to end things. Naomi Klein asked for a private meeting. Not with Edward. With Rachel. They met in a small office that smelled faintly of recycled air and anxiety. "They're rushing," Naomi said immediately. Rachel nodded. "Yes," she said. Naomi's hand shook slightly. "They want me to sign off on a system integrity report," she said. "Before we finish reconstruction." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And will you?" she asked. Naomi hesitated. "If I don't," she said, "they'll replace me." Rachel leaned back. "And if you do?" she asked. Naomi looked at the floor. "Then the house becomes the truth," she said. Rachel held her gaze. "And the man inside it disappears," she replied. Naomi swallowed. "I didn't build it for this," she said. Rachel's voice softened. "No one ever does," she replied. Edward met with Grant Mercer again. This time not at the house. At a pub near Fleet Street, loud enough to drown out caution. Grant arrived with a folder. Not digital. Paper. Edward approved. "They're trying to close it," Grant said without preamble. Edward nodded. "Of course they are," he said. Grant leaned forward. "I can blow it open," he said. "Name Reed. Name Quill. Suggest complicity." Edward shook his head. "No," he said. Grant frowned. "Why?" he asked. Edward sipped his drink. "Because you'd be wrong," he replied. Grant stiffened. They were involved, he said. Edward nodded. They were adjacent, he corrected. Adjacency isn't guilt. Grant's jaw tightened. People don't care about nuance, he said. Edward met his gaze. They care about coherence, he replied. And you don't have it yet. Edward returned to the timeline. He pinned new events to it. The leak, the statement, the report request. See, he said to Rachel later. They're compressing. Rachel nodded. Someone's nervous, she said. Edward corrected her. Someone's impatient, he said. Nervous people freeze. Impatient people miscalculate. The next move came from Evelyn Ashford. A charity announcement. A public appearance. A soft interview about grief and legacy. Edward watched the footage in silence. She's repositioning, Rachel said. Edward nodded. She's retiming, he replied. Rachel frowned. How? She asked. Edward answered calmly. She's trying to move the emotional peak, he said. From suspicion to sympathy. Rachel sighed. Will it work? She asked. Edward shrugged. Emotionally, he said. Yes. Investigatively. He paused. No. Edward requested one thing. Not a warrant. Not an arrest. A delay. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You want to slow them down? She asked. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. I want to speed one person up. Rachel understood immediately. Read, she said. Edward nodded. He lives in routine, he said. Routine hates uncertainty. They invited Reed back under the guise of clarification. No accusation. No confrontation. Just a calendar invite marked urgent. Reed arrived early. Edward noted that. Thank you for coming, Edward said. Reed nodded, eyes flicking to the door. I've already explained everything, Reed said. Edward smiled faintly. Yes, he said. You explained the past. Reed frowned. What do you mean? He asked. Edward leaned forward. I want to talk about what happens next, he said. Reed stiffened. Next? He repeated. Edward nodded. There will be audits, he said. System reviews. Protocol changes. Reed swallowed. And, he asked. Edward watched him carefully. And maintenance routines will change, he said. Background access will be reclassified. Reed's jaw tightened. Edward continued calmly. You won't be invisible anymore, he said. Reed's hands clenched. Rachel felt it. The shift. Not fear. Loss. Reed spoke quietly. I followed procedure, he said again. Edward nodded. Yes, he said. That's why this worked. Reed looked up sharply. Edward held his gaze. Procedures create expectations, Edward said. You knew when the house would stop noticing. Reed's voice cracked slightly. I didn't kill him, he said. Edward nodded. No, he replied. You prepared the room. Silence. Outside, the press continued to speculate. Inside, calendars kept moving. The corporation wanted closure. The public wanted a villain. The system wanted vindication. Edward wanted one thing. A mistake. And mistakes always came from people who believed time was still on their side. Edward closed his notebook. Now, he said to Rachel afterward, we wait for someone to try to end this too cleanly. Rachel nodded. And when they do? She asked. Edward replied quietly. Then we'll know, he said. Who was counting on silence? Edward Hale had learned to recognize the sound of a mistake before it was made. It was not a noise. It was a rhythm. People who were about to air did not pause long enough between sentences. The report arrived just after midnight. Rachel saw the timestamp first and frowned. Who sends an internal integrity assessment at 12:27? She asked. Edward didn't look surprised. Someone who doesn't want it read carefully, he replied. The document was titled conservatively, Preliminary Findings, System Integrity Review. Edward read it slowly, not because it was dense, because it was eager. The language was polished, confident, too confident. Phrases repeated themselves with minor variation. No evidence of unauthorized access. No deviation from expected system behavior. No indication of external interference. Edward circled the word external. Rachel noticed. What? She asked. Edward tapped the page. They answered a question no one asked, he said. Edward flipped to the appendix. Logs. Charts. Summaries. He stopped at a small table near the end. Calibration data. The same cycle Naomi had mentioned. But something was wrong. Edward leaned closer. Rachel felt it immediately. You found it, she said. Edward nodded. The timestamps, he said. They're neat. Rachel frowned. Neat, she echoed. Edward pointed. Calibration ended at 23:58, he said. Secure mode engaged at 0:14. Rachel nodded. That's what we know, she said. Edward shook his head. That's what they want us to know, he replied. Edward pulled up the raw logs Naomi had shown him earlier. Side by side. He compared line by line. The difference was small. A smoothing artifact. One log rounded. The other didn't. Edward circled a single entry. 23 hours 56 minutes and 42 seconds. Environmental stabilization complete. Rachel leaned in. That's before calibration ended, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. Which means the room stabilized early. Rachel frowned. So? She asked. Edward looked at her. So someone stopped adjusting, he said. On purpose. Edward called Naomi. She answered on the second ring. You need to see this, Edward said. Minutes later, she stood over the table, eyes darting. This shouldn't be here, she said. Edward watched her face. It is, he replied. Naomi swallowed. That means, she began. Edward finished for her. Someone interfered with the calibration window, he said. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. But not the system, she said. The process. Edward nodded. Someone anticipated how long stabilization would take, he said, and acted before it finished. Rachel straightened. Who wrote this report? She asked. Naomi hesitated. Miles coordinated it, she said. But facilities provided the data. Edward nodded. Facilities, he repeated. They brought Thomas Reed back. This time not as background. As subject. Reed looked different. Not guilty. Alert. Too alert. You've seen the report, Reed said quickly. It confirms what I told you. Edward didn't sit. Why did stabilization complete early? He asked. Reed blinked. I don't understand, he said. Edward slid the document across the table. You signed off on this, he said. Reed glanced at it. Yes, he said. Edward waited. Reed shifted. Sometimes systems settle faster, he said. Environmental conditions were favorable. Edward nodded. And how would you know that? He asked. Reed froze. Rachel leaned forward. You weren't there, she said. Reed swallowed. I've worked with these systems for years, he said. Edward smiled faintly. So you predicted it, he said. Reed looked up sharply. He began. Edward raised a hand. You didn't witness it, Edward said. You expected it. Silence fell. Edward spoke gently now. You knew the house would quiet down early, he said. You knew when it would stop noticing fine changes. Reed shook his head. I followed protocol, he said again. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. And you followed it too well. Rachel felt it land. Reed had not broken rules. He had optimized them. Edward leaned closer. Tell me, he said quietly. Why did the report say no external interference? Reed frowned. That's standard phrasing, he said. Edward nodded. But you knew, he said. That interference wouldn't be external. Reed's breath hitched. Rachel watched his hands. They were clenched now. Edward stepped back. This report tried to end the investigation, he said. Too soon. Rachel nodded. And that means someone was afraid of time, she said. Edward corrected her. Afraid of delay, he said. Edward closed the file. We don't arrest Reed, he said. Rachel stared. What? She asked. Edward met her gaze. Not yet, he said. He's not the end. Rachel frowned. He prepared the conditions, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. But someone else chose the moment. Edward looked at the board. Calibration. Stabilization. Secure mode. Death. The mistake, Edward said, was believing this was technical. Rachel nodded slowly. It was administrative, she said. Edward smiled faintly. Timing crimes always are, he replied. Outside, Ashford Systems issued another statement. This one shorter. More urgent. Less confident. Edward read it and closed his notebook. Good, he said. Rachel looked at him. What? She asked. Edward answered quietly. They're starting to rush. Rachel felt the weight of it. And rushing, she said, is how people reveal what they know. Edward nodded. And when they knew it, he said. Edward Hale believed that every crime contained a single decision. Not the act. Not the method. The moment. They returned to the Ashford residence late in the evening. Not because it was necessary, because it felt correct. The house looked different at night. Less impressive. Less architectural. More honest. Lights glowed softly behind glass walls, the system maintaining its preferred illusion of calm. The garden lights marked paths no one walked anymore. Rachel stood beside Edward at the edge of the drive. People think the crime happened in that room, she said. Edward nodded. It didn't, he replied. It happened earlier. Rachel frowned. When? She asked. Edward looked at the house. When someone decided this was the right night, he said. They entered without ceremony. Orchid recognized them immediately. Authorized presence detected, the system said. Edward listened to the tone. Neutral. Uncurious. This house doesn't ask why, Edward said quietly. It only asks whether the answer fits. They stood again in the secure suite. Empty now. Stripped of context. Rachel looked at the chair. He trusted this room, she said. Edward nodded. He trusted the routine, he replied. Rachel turned. Talk me through it, she said. From the decision. Edward inhaled slowly. Someone knew 3 things, Edward said. 1. The house would recalibrate. 2. The recalibration would smooth the environment. 3. Gideon would be alone afterward. Rachel nodded. And they knew all 3 ahead of time, she said. Edward corrected her. They knew too, he said. They assumed the 3rd. Rachel stiffened. Assumed? She asked. Edward nodded. They didn't control Gideon, he said. They controlled probability. Edward walked to the window. People like Gideon follow patterns, he said. Stress. Demonstration. Reward. Rachel understood. He always slept here after major events, she said. Edward nodded. And the system knew that, he replied. Rachel frowned. So the house predicted him, she said. Edward turned. No, he said. The killer did. Edward laid out the timeline one last time. Not on a board. In words. Calibration ends, he said. The room stabilizes early. The house stops caring about micro changes. Rachel listened. Gideon enters, Edward continued. The environment already expects him. Rachel swallowed. And then, she said. Edward's voice lowered. And then someone does something that doesn't look like violence, he said. It looks like continuity. Rachel rubbed her arms. So the question isn't who had access, she said. Edward nodded. Access is plentiful, he replied. It's not who understood the system, Rachel continued. Edward nodded again. Understanding can be learned, he said. Rachel met his gaze. It's who understood Gideon, she said. Edward smiled faintly. Yes, he replied. They left the secure suite and moved through the house slowly. Edward stopped in the corridor. This is where the decision solidified, he said. Rachel frowned. This corridor? She asked. Edward nodded. Between the public and the private, he said. Between performance and rest. Rachel felt the weight of it. He walked this path willingly, she said. Edward nodded. And someone counted on that, he replied. Rachel stopped. Evelyn, she said quietly. Edward didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. Rachel continued. She knew his rhythms, she said. She knew his stress. She knew his habits. Edward nodded slowly. She also knew the calendar, he said. Rachel exhaled. But knowledge isn't guilt, she said. Edward agreed. No, he replied. But timing is responsibility. Edward turned back toward the entrance. This case won't end with a confession, he said. Rachel frowned. Then how? She asked. Edward answered calmly. With a reconstruction so precise, he said, that only one version of events survives. Rachel nodded. And when we present it? She asked. Edward met her gaze. The person who chose the moment, he said, will recognize themselves. Outside, the night air felt heavier. The press was gone. The house stood silent. Rachel broke the quiet. This was planned, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. But not cruelly. Rachel looked at him sharply. What do you mean? She asked. Edward considered his words. It was planned efficiently, he said. Cruelty requires attention. Rachel felt a chill. Edward stopped at the gate. Chapter's over, he said. Rachel looked at the house one last time. We know how, she said. Edward nodded. And we know when, he replied. Rachel met his eyes. But we don't yet know who acted, she said. Edward smiled faintly. No, he said. But we know who needed this night. Edward opened his notebook. Next page. Next phase. Chapter 4, he said quietly, is where we stop studying the house. Rachel raised an eyebrow. And start studying what? She asked. Edward answered without hesitation. Motives that wear clean hands, he said. Edward Hale always followed the aftermath, not the event, the quiet redistribution that came after. The boardroom at Ashford Systems was full for the first time since the funeral, not full of grief, full of alignment. Executives sat straighter. Lawyers spoke more confidently. Voices overlapped without conflict. Rachel noticed it immediately. No one here is mourning, she said quietly. Edward nodded. They're relieved, he replied. Miles Quill stood at the head of the table, remote in hand. A presentation glowed behind him. Transition strategy, stability and continuity. Edward watched the slide change. Market reassurance. Investor confidence. Narrative containment. This is fast, Rachel murmured. Edward didn't look away. Yes, he said. That's the point. Miles spoke smoothly. With Gideon's unfortunate passing, he said, we have an opportunity to reaffirm our core values. Edward tilted his head slightly. Opportunity. That word again. Rachel's jaw tightened. Edward didn't interrupt. He observed. Who spoke? Who didn't? Who deferred? Power didn't announce itself. It leaned back and waited to be acknowledged. After the meeting, Edward and Rachel stood in the corridor. They've already moved on, Rachel said. Edward nodded. Because nothing broke, he replied. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? She asked. Edward answered calmly. No scandal, he said. No system failure. No visible violence. Rachel understood. The death fits, she said. Edward nodded. It integrates, he replied. Edward requested financial documents, not inheritance. Cash flow, insurance, deferred contracts, contingent liabilities. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You're not subtle, she said. Edward shrugged. Neither is money, he replied. They sat with a financial analyst late into the evening, a quiet man with careful words. He was insured heavily, the analyst said. Key man clauses, redundancy coverage. Edward nodded. And death activates them, he asked. Yes, the analyst replied. Rachel frowned. Not resignation, she asked. The analyst shook his head. No, he said. Only death. Edward made a note. Absence had a price. And it was precise. Edward traced another thread. Legislation. A regulatory bill Gideon had opposed. Publicly. Privately. Rachel skimmed the briefing. This would have slowed their expansion, she said. Edward nodded. And now? He asked. Rachel checked. It's being amended, she said. Softened. Edward leaned back. Opposition lost its voice, he said. Rachel swallowed. Convenient, she said. Edward didn't correct her. They spoke with legal counsel. Carefully. Always carefully. Gideon was forceful, the lawyer said. Not everyone agreed with his stance. Edward nodded. And now? He asked. The lawyer hesitated. Consensus is easier, he said. Edward wrote that down. Consensus achieved through silence. Edward visited Evelyn again. This time without Rachel. Not secrecy. Focus. She sat opposite him, composed. You're looking at outcomes, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. They're louder than actions. Evelyn folded her hands. I didn't want him dead, she said. Edward believed her. I know, he replied. She blinked. You do, she asked. Edward nodded. You wanted him gone from the equation, he said. Silence. Not denial. Recognition. Edward continued gently. He was an obstacle, he said. To compromise. To speed. To comfort. Evelyn looked down. He wouldn't bend, she said. Edward nodded. No, he replied. He believed in friction. Evelyn laughed softly. He called it integrity, she said. Edward met her gaze. It often is, he replied. Edward didn't accuse. He mapped. You discuss stress, he said. Sleep. Health. Evelyn nodded. Yes, she said. You normalized exhaustion, Edward continued. Encouraged rest. Evelyn swallowed. I loved him, she said. Edward nodded. And you helped him relax, he replied. Silence again. Edward left her with one thought. Comfort is not neutral, he said. It changes outcomes. Rachel and Edward reconvened later. She didn't kill him, Rachel said. Edward nodded. No, he replied. But she made death less disruptive, Rachel said. Edward agreed. She prepared the world, he said. So the absence would be profitable. Edward stepped back. This wasn't murder for gain, he said. It was murder for continuity. Rachel frowned. That's worse, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. Because no one feels responsible. Edward looked at the full picture now. Reed prepared the room. Miles prepared the narrative. Evelyn prepared the emotional landscape. The system prepared the silence. Rachel exhaled slowly. And Gideon? She asked. Edward answered quietly. He prepared nothing, he said. He trusted. Edward closed his notebook. One person still hasn't been tested, he said. Rachel looked up. Who? She asked. Edward replied calmly. The one who benefited without ever touching the house, he said. Rachel felt the weight of it. That's the real killer, she said. Edward nodded. Clean hands, he replied. Dirty outcomes. Edward Hale learned long ago that the most consequential arguments rarely ended with raised voices. They ended with silence. He found the argument in fragments. Not in recordings. Not in messages. In omissions. The meeting had taken place 6 days before Gideon Ashford's death. Officially, it was listed as a strategy review. 90 minutes. No minutes recorded. No summary circulated. Edward stared at the calendar entry. That's not a meeting, he said quietly to Rachel. That's a negotiation without witnesses. Rachel nodded. And Gideon attended, she said. Edward underlined the entry. So did Miles, he replied. And legal. And one external advisor. Rachel frowned. Who? She asked. Edward answered calmly. Someone who didn't want their name attached to failure. The advisor's name surfaced only after Edward requested billing records. Not contracts. Invoices. A consulting firm with an innocuous name. Short engagement. High fee. One deliverable risk assessment of executive continuity. Rachel read the title twice. That's cold, she said. Edward nodded. It's polite, he replied. Which makes it dangerous. Edward tracked the advisor down easily. A man in his early 50s. No criminal record. No scandals. a reputation for resolving impasses. They met in a quiet restaurant near the river. The advisor smiled like someone who had never been wrong loudly enough to be remembered. "I don't recall anything improper," he said. Edward nodded. "I'm not asking about impropriety," he replied. "I'm asking about frustration." The man hesitated. "Just a fraction." Edward noted it. "He wouldn't compromise," the advisor said finally. "Gideon, I mean." Edward nodded. "On what?" he asked. The man stirred his drink. "On speed," he said. "On optics. On letting the system evolve quietly." Edward leaned in slightly. "Evolve into what?" he asked. The advisor smiled thinly. "Into something less rigid," he said. Edward nodded. "And Gideon?" he asked. The advisor exhaled. "He believed rigidity was the point," he said. Edward smiled faintly. "He was right," he replied. Edward didn't press. He waited. Silence did the rest. "He said no," the advisor added. "Repeatedly." Edward wrote that down. "No." A complete sentence. Edward reconstructed the meeting afterward. Not with words. With posture. Gideon would have sat forward. Hands flat on the table. Voice calm. Miles would have leaned back. Open palms. Language of reassurance. Legal would have spoken softly. Risk. Exposure. Perception. Evelyn would have listened. Always listening. Rachel joined Edward later that night. "You think that meeting was the turning point?" she said. Edward nodded. "Yes," he replied. "That's when time split." Rachel frowned. "Explain," she said. Edward answered slowly. "Before that meeting," he said, "Gideon was an obstacle that might move." Rachel nodded. "And after?" she asked. Edward met her gaze. "He became an obstacle that wouldn't," he said. Edward traced another silence. No emails after the meeting. No follow-ups. No escalation. Just acceptance. "That's not how disagreement ends," Rachel said. Edward agreed. "That's how it stops," he replied. Rachel leaned back. "So instead of arguing," she said, "they waited." Edward nodded. "And adjusted the environment," he added. Rachel felt it. "They didn't defeat him," she said. "They outlasted him." Edward nodded. "Yes," he replied. "And when waiting wasn't enough." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Edward returned to Evelyn one last time that evening. Not for answers. For confirmation. He didn't accuse. He didn't threaten. He asked one question. "What did Gideon say when you told him to rest that night?" Edward asked. Evelyn closed her eyes. "He said he'd earned it," she replied. Edward nodded. "And you believed him?" he asked. Evelyn swallowed. "Yes," she said. Edward stood. "So did everyone else," he replied. Edward walked out into the night. Rachel waited by the car. "That argument never happened," she said. Edward nodded. "And that's why it mattered," he replied. Rachel looked back at the house. "They chose silence," she said. Edward nodded. "And silence chose the moment," he replied. Edward opened his notebook. Only one section remained empty. Not how, not when, but who finally decided that waiting was no longer acceptable. Edward closed the notebook again. "Chapter 5, he said quietly, is where someone realizes silence won't protect them anymore." Rachel met his gaze. "And then?" she asked. Edward answered calmly. "Then the story stops being elegant," he said, "and becomes explicit." Edward Hale insisted that the reconstruction take place inside the house. Not in a courtroom. Not in a conference room. Not in an office where words felt protected by distance. Inside the space that had agreed with the outcome. The Ashford residence at dusk did not look like a crime scene. That was its most persuasive quality. The glass reflected the fading sky with soft indifference. The stone absorbed the cooling air without complaint. Lights activated in gentle gradients, as if the house were exhaling after a long day of being admired. Rachel Morgan noticed something immediately. "It still wants to perform," she said quietly. Edward nodded. "Houses like this don't stop performing," he replied. "They stop being questioned." They entered without ceremony. No police tape. No uniforms. No visible authority. Only presence. Orchid acknowledged them in its usual tone. Authorized presence detected. Edward did not respond. He had asked Naomi to mute the system's voice afterward, but he wanted this first line spoken. He wanted everyone to hear how calm certainty sounded. They gathered not in the secure suite, but in the central living space. Edward had chosen it deliberately. "This is where the lie begins," he said. Miles Quill leaned against the table, arms folded, expression attentive but closed. Evelyn Ashford sat on the far sofa, posture immaculate, hands folded in her lap. Thomas Reed stood near the doorway again, as if proximity to exits were a habit he did not notice anymore. Naomi Klein sat stiffly in a chair she had not chosen. Rachel remained standing. Edward noticed everything. "We are not here to assign blame," Edward said. Miles relaxed slightly. Edward continued, "We are here to remove interpretation." Miles stiffened again. Edward gestured slowly around the room. "This house has already interpreted the night," he said. It concluded nothing unusual occurred. Naomi swallowed. Edward went on. "Our task is not to argue with the house," he said. "Our task is to understand why it felt comfortable." Silence settled. Not resistance. Attention. Edward walked toward the hallway leading to the secure suite. "Before we talk about death," he said, "we need to talk about space." He stopped at the threshold. "This corridor," he said, "is where the transition happens." Rachel frowned. "Transition?" she asked. Edward nodded. "From performance to privacy," he replied. "From witness rich to witness poor." He took one step forward. "Every system has zones," he said. "Somewhere behavior is loud. Somewhere it is expected to quiet down." Edward turned back. "Who last walked this corridor with Gideon?" he asked. Evelyn answered quietly. "I did," she said. Edward nodded. "At what time?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. "Shortly after midnight," she said. "He said he was exhausted." Edward noted the phrasing. "Not going to bed. Exhausted." Edward moved into the secure suite. The room was unchanged. That was deliberate too. Edward stood still for a long moment, letting the room assert itself. "Most reconstructions start with the body," he said. "We're starting with the absence of reaction." He pointed to the walls. "This room expects calm," he said. "It is tuned for it." Naomi closed her eyes. Edward approached the chair. "Gideon Ashford sat here," he said. "Not collapsed. Not alarmed." He placed his hand lightly on the armrest. "The chair adjusted," he said. "The room accepted him." Rachel felt a tightening in her chest. Edward continued. "At this moment," he said, "the house had already decided what normal felt like." Thomas Reed shifted. Edward did not look at him yet. Edward walked to the wall panel Naomi had shown him days earlier. "This panel represents trust," he said. Naomi looked up sharply. Edward continued. "Calibration," he said, "is the system's way of asking the room what it should tolerate." He turned. "And that night," he said, "the answer was, almost anything as long as it was slow." Edward returned to the center of the room. "Now we reconstruct space minute by minute," he said. Rachel straightened. Edward spoke steadily. "At 23:30 calibration begins," he said. "The house stops judging. At 23:56 stabilization completes early," he continued. "The house becomes confident. At 0:14 Gideon enters," he said. "The room is already compliant." Miles opened his mouth. Edward raised a hand. "Not a failure," he said calmly. "A condition." Edward paused. "This room did not resist what followed," he said, "because resistance would have required surprise." Rachel nodded slowly. "And there was none," she said. Edward met her gaze. "No," he replied. "Only continuation." Edward let silence do its work. Then he added, "The room did not need to be tricked," he said. "It needed to be reassured." Naomi felt something break quietly inside her. Edward stepped back. This space did not witness a murder. he said. It hosted a process. Miles shook his head. That's semantics, he said. Edward looked at him. No, he replied. That's architecture. Edward turned toward the door. This concludes the first reconstruction, he said. Rachel blinked. That's it, she asked. Edward nodded. For space, he replied. Next, we reconstruct the body. He looked at each of them in turn. And bodies, he added quietly, are harder to silence than rooms. Edward Hale always warned people before he spoke about the body. Not out of courtesy, out of precision. What follows, he said quietly, will not sound violent. He stood beside the chair again, hands relaxed, voice calm. That does not make it harmless. No one interrupted him. Even Miles Quill, who usually filled silence with reassurance, remained still. Edward began with a question. Does anyone here believe Gideon panicked? He asked. No one answered. Naomi shook her head slowly. He wouldn't have, she said. He hated panic. Edward nodded. Exactly, he replied. And the room was designed to reward that. Edward gestured toward the chair. Bodies are noisy, he said. Not emotionally. Physically. He tapped the armrest lightly. They twitch. They shift. They betray discomfort long before they express fear. Rachel listened closely. But Gideon didn't, she said. Edward nodded. No, he replied. He became quieter. Edward described it slowly without drama. Not as a story. As a sequence. First, he said. Fatigue. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly. Edward continued. Not sudden, he said. Accumulated. Sleep deprivation. Cognitive load. Stress presented as purpose. He looked at Evelyn. You helped him feel entitled to rest, he said gently. Evelyn swallowed. Yes, she said. He deserved it. Edward nodded. He did, he replied. And that mattered. Edward moved closer to the window. When the body believes it is safe, he said, it stops announcing itself. Rachel frowned. Meaning? She asked. Edward answered calmly. Breathing slows, he said. Posture settles. Muscle tension releases. He gestured back to the chair. The system saw compliance, he said. And compliance looks like health. Naomi's face had gone pale. Edward turned to Naomi now. Your sensors track deviation, he said. Not decline. Naomi nodded faintly. Yes, she said. Edward continued. And decline, he said, is how most people die. Silence thickened. Edward explained what the room would have recorded. Heart rate variability decreasing, he said. Respiration smoothing. No sharp movements. No sudden thermal changes. Rachel felt a chill. So the system would see, she began. Edward finished for her. Someone becoming more acceptable, he said. Edward paused deliberately. This is important, he said. There was no moment where the body screamed. Miles shifted. You're saying he didn't suffer, he said. Edward met his gaze. I'm saying suffering is loud, he replied. And this death was designed to be quiet. Edward moved to the air data. Breathing, he said, is usually how rooms catch us. Naomi nodded. CO2, she whispered. Edward nodded. Yes, he said. But only if it spikes. He traced an invisible line in the air. If oxygen decreases gradually, he said, the system adapts. Rachel's jaw tightened. And the body, she asked. Edward answered carefully. The body adapts too, he said. Until it can't. Edward lowered his voice. Loss of consciousness, he said, does not look like violence. Evelyn closed her eyes. Edward continued. No thrashing. No collapse. Just stillness arriving earlier than expected. Edward stepped back. The system interpreted this as sleep, he said. Naomi shook her head slightly. That's monstrous, she said. Edward corrected her. No, he replied. It's efficient. The word landed heavily. Edward addressed the group again. At no point did the body challenge the room, he said. So the room did not challenge the body. Rachel nodded slowly. A mutual misunderstanding, she said. Edward agreed. Yes, he replied. And misunderstanding is survivable. He paused. This was not, he added. Edward now addressed the absence everyone had avoided. The medical examiner found no signs of struggle, he said. No bruising. No defensive marks. He looked at Rachel. You saw the report, he said. Rachel nodded. Textbook, she said. Edward smiled faintly. Textbooks describe outcomes, he said. Not choices. Edward returned to the chair one final time. This is where it ended, he said. He placed his hand lightly on the backrest. But the body had already agreed long before this, he continued. Agreed that nothing urgent was happening. Rachel exhaled slowly. That's why there was no moment, she said. Edward nodded. No cliff, he replied. Only slope. Edward turned back to them all. This was a death that asked permission, he said. And every system involved said yes. No one spoke. Even Orchid remained silent. Edward closed his notebook. This concludes the reconstruction of the body, he said. Rachel swallowed. And the killer? She asked quietly. Edward looked at her. The killer, he said, is the one who understood that the body would cooperate. He stepped toward the door. Next, he said, we reconstruct the decision. He paused. And decisions, he added, are louder than rooms or bodies ever are. Edward Hale had always said that decisions do not look like decisions. They look like pauses. He did not speak at once. He let the pause stretch. No one in the room moved. Even those accustomed to controlling space now felt themselves inside it, not above it. Reconstructing the space showed where this became possible, Edward said. Reconstructing the body showed how it happened. He lifted his gaze. Now we're talking about why, he continued. And that is always the most uncomfortable part. Edward was no longer standing by the chair. He had moved closer to the center of the room. Decisions are rarely made alone, he said. But responsibility almost always tries to settle on a single person. He paused. Today we won't allow that. He turned to Rachel. When did you first feel it wasn't an accident? He asked. Rachel did not pretend. When I realized no one was surprised, she said. Everyone was ready. Edward nodded. Readiness is the trace of a decision, he said. Even when no one voices it. He turned back to the group. The decision didn't sound like he must die, Edward said. It sounded much quieter. He began to list the thoughts calmly, without accusation. He won't change. He's slowing the process down. He creates risks. We can't go on like this. The words hung in the air. This isn't a conspiracy, Edward said. It's consensus. Miles Quill exhaled sharply. You're describing corporate reality, he said. That isn't a crime. Edward looked at him. No, he agreed. It's preparation. Edward went on. After that meeting, he said, nothing happened. He paused. That was the decision. Naomi lifted her head. You mean? She began. Edward nodded. They stopped arguing, he said. Stopped pushing. Stopped trying to convince him. He looked at Evelyn. Because they understood, he continued, that he would not yield. Evelyn slowly closed her eyes. And here, Edward said, expectation stops being passive. He took a step forward. When you stop hoping that a person will change, he said, you begin adapting the world to their absence. The words were quiet. That was why they struck harder. Edward unfolded the decision layer by layer. The first layer was emotional. He's tired, Edward said. He needs rest. He's taking on too much. He looked at Evelyn. That's care, he said. And care is the perfect mask. Evelyn did not deny it. The second layer was organizational. What if he's gone for a week? What if he takes a pause? What if decisions are made without him? Miles stiffened. We always plan for succession, he said. Edward nodded. Yes, he said. You began planning it internally. The third layer was temporal. Edward gestured to an imaginary calendar. You saw a window, he said. Short. Quiet. He looked at Thomas Reed. And you understood, he continued, that if something happened within it, the world would not scream. Reed clenched his fists. Edward stopped. And here, he said, waiting turns into choice. Rachel felt it physically. Because now, she said, doing nothing is also an action. Edward smiled. Exactly, he said. He moved closer to the window. No one gave an order, he said. No one said, do it. He turned back. But everyone did enough, he said, so that if something happened, no one would interfere. The silence grew thick. Edward asked the key question. Who was the first to realize, he asked, that the argument was over? He did not wait for an answer. The one, he said, who stopped trying to win. Miles looked away. Edward continued more gently now. The decision was not in the action, he said, but in the permission. He looked at each of them. Permission for silence. Permission for the pause. Permission for exhaustion to become the ending. Edward closed his eyes for a second. This is the purest form of violence, he said, because it requires no hands. Rachel said softly, only consent. Edward nodded. He stepped back. We have reconstructed the decision, he said. It doesn't belong to one person. He looked at them. It is distributed. Miles jerked his head up. That can't be proven, he said. Edward replied calmly. That's exactly why it was chosen. Edward closed his notebook. At this stage, he said, truth ceases to be legal. Rachel tensed. And then what? She asked. Edward answered. Then only consequences remain. He paused. And people, he added, who won't be able to live with what they now know. Edward headed for the exit. One final part remains, he said. Not about the night. Not about the death. He stopped at the door. About, he said. Who exactly will not withstand the silence? Edward Hale knew exactly when people stopped listening to logic. It was the moment they started protecting themselves. The collapse did not begin with shouting. It began with language. Subtle shifts. Defensive phrasing. Sentences that suddenly needed qualifiers. Edward noticed it before anyone else spoke. He always did. Miles Quill was the first to move. Not physically. Verbally. We should be careful how we frame this, Miles said, voice smooth, professional. There are implications. Edward turned to him slowly. Framing, Edward repeated. Miles nodded. Yes, he said. Public perception. Legal exposure. Responsibility. Edward tilted his head. You're worried about blame, he said. Miles corrected him immediately. I'm worried about misinterpretation. Edward smiled faintly. Of course you are, he said. Rachel felt it then. The shift from investigation to containment. That's fast, she said quietly. Miles met her gaze. This is already bigger than us, he said. Edward nodded. That's usually when people start lying, he replied. Miles stiffened. I haven't lied, he said. Edward agreed. No, he said. You've started selecting. Edward walked toward the center of the room again. This is the part everyone misunderstands, he said. No one here thought they were doing harm. He paused. That's why it worked. Thomas Reed shifted his weight. I followed protocol, he said again. Edward looked at him. Yes, he replied. And now protocol is collapsing around you. Reed frowned. What do you mean? He asked. Edward answered calmly. When systems fail morally, he said, they retreat administratively. Rachel nodded. Paper, she said. Reviews. Committees. Edward smiled. Sacrifices, he added. Edward turned toward Naomi. She hadn't spoken. Not once. Naomi, Edward said gently. She looked up. You understand what's happening, he said. She swallowed. They're going to isolate responsibility, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. And responsibility does not distribute well under pressure. Naomi's voice shook. They'll make it technical, she said. A flaw. A process gap. Edward corrected her softly. They'll make it yours, he said. Silence fell. Miles exhaled sharply. That's not fair, he said. Edward looked at him. No, he replied. It's efficient. Edward continued. When clean hands begin to sweat, he said, they reach for soap. Rachel frowned. What soap? She asked. Edward answered. Procedure, he said. Distance. Resignations that look voluntary. Naomi closed her eyes. Edward stepped closer to Miles. You're already preparing statements, Edward said. Miles didn't deny it. Someone has to, he replied. Edward nodded. Yes, he said. And someone always does. Rachel interjected. So what happens now? She asked. Edward didn't hesitate. Now, he said, someone will try to end this. Edward outlined it calmly. An internal review will conclude there was no wrongdoing, he said. A recommendation will be made. A system update announced. Miles nodded slowly. That would stabilize things, he said. Edward smiled faintly. Yes, he replied. And erase responsibility. Edward turned toward Evelyn Ashford. She had been silent the longest. That won't be enough for you, Edward said. Evelyn looked up sharply. What do you mean? She asked. Edward met her gaze. You didn't want this to be loud, he said. But you didn't want it to be nothing either. Evelyn's composure cracked slightly. You think I planned this, she said. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. I think you allowed it. Rachel felt the weight of the word. Allowed. Edward pressed gently. You wanted continuity, he said. No scandal. No trial. No spectacle. Evelyn whispered. I wanted it to stop. Edward nodded. And now it has, he said. Edward stepped back. This is where clean hands collapse, he said. Because everyone wants the ending. He looked around the room. But no one wants authorship. Rachel felt anger rise. So they walk? She asked. Edward met her eyes. Some will, he said. Some won't. Rachel frowned. How do you know? She asked. Edward answered quietly. Because pressure does not break everyone, he said. It reveals who cannot tolerate ambiguity. Edward turned back to Thomas Reed. You'll be reassigned, he said. Officially. Reed nodded slowly. Edward turned to Naomi. You'll be asked to sign something, he said. Naomi looked up. Edward met her gaze. Don't, he said simply. Naomi inhaled sharply. Edward turned last to Miles. You will try to close this with language, Edward said. Miles nodded. That's my role, he said. Edward leaned closer. And that, he said quietly, is where you'll make your mistake. Miles frowned. What mistake? He asked. Edward smiled faintly. You'll talk too soon, he said. Too confidently. Edward stepped toward the door. We're almost done, he said. Rachel followed him. Outside, the house remained calm. Too calm. Who breaks first? Rachel asked. Edward didn't look back. The one who needs silence the most, he replied. Silence never breaks loudly. That is its final deception. The statement was scheduled for 9 a.m. Edward Hale knew that before it was announced. He always knew when language was being prepared to replace truth. Rachel learned about it from a junior press officer who spoke too fast and apologized too much. They're calling it a clarification, she said, lowering her phone. System-focused. Forward-looking. Edward nodded. Of course, he said. Nothing closes a death like optimism. The briefing room was full. Not crowded. Arranged. Journalists sat where they were meant to sit. Cameras were aligned to flattering angles. The backdrop displayed the Ashford Systems logo. Clean, neutral, unthreatening. Edward stood at the back. Always at the back. Miles Quill stepped up to the podium with the confidence of a man who believed timing was still on his side. Thank you for coming, Miles said. We want to address recent speculation with clarity and responsibility. Edward closed his eyes briefly. Responsibility. That word again. Miles continued. After extensive internal review, he said, we have found no evidence of malicious intent, external interference, or system failure. Edward opened his eyes. Rachel felt her jaw tighten. This investigation has shown, Miles went on, that Mr. Ashford's passing was the result of natural causes, occurring within a fully compliant environment. Edward watched the room. Most people nodded, not because they believed it, because it fit. Then Miles made the mistake. It was small, almost invisible. We are confident, he said, that no human action influenced the system's behavior that night. Edward felt it immediately. Rachel did too. She whispered, "That's not what anyone asked." Edward nodded. A hand went up. Not one of the usual reporters. Grant Mercer. Independent. Uninvited. Dangerous. "Can you clarify something?" Grant asked. Miles smiled. "Of course," he said. Grant leaned forward. "You're saying no one influenced the system," he said. "But are you saying no one influenced the conditions under which the system operated?" The room shifted. Just slightly. Miles paused. "Too long." Edward smiled faintly. "We've addressed that," Miles said carefully. "The system functioned as designed." Grant nodded. "Exactly," he said. "So my question is simple." He looked directly at Miles. "Who decided that night was the right night for calibration?" Silence thickened. Not dramatic. Uncomfortable. Miles opened his mouth. Closed it. Edward felt the pressure finally reverse. Miles spoke again. "Calibration schedules are routine," he said. "They're handled by operations." Grant didn't move. "And who approved that schedule?" he asked. Miles inhaled. Edward knew that breath. It was the breath of someone who realized the room had stopped cooperating. Miles answered. "Multiple departments," he said. "No single individual." Edward nodded to himself. There it was. Distributed responsibility. The last refuge. Grant pressed. "And who knew Mr. Ashford would be alone afterward?" he asked. Miles frowned. "That's speculative," he said. Grant smiled thinly. "So is your certainty," he replied. A murmur spread. Not outrage. Interest. Edward stepped forward. Not to the podium. Just into visibility. Rachel watched him carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't accuse. He simply existed where silence could see him. Another reporter spoke. "Are you suggesting," she asked Miles, "that this was preventable?" Miles hesitated. Edward felt the shift. This was it. "Yes," Miles said finally. "Better protocols might have." Edward exhaled softly. Too fast. Too eager. Rachel closed her eyes. "Might have changed the outcome," Miles finished. The word changed hung in the air. Edward knew the damage was done. Grant didn't wait. "So you're saying the system behaved correctly?" he said. "But the timing was unfortunate?" Miles nodded. "Yes," he said. Edward almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Edward turned to Rachel. "It's over," he said quietly. Rachel frowned. "That's it?" she asked. Edward nodded. "He just admitted the decision mattered," he said. "And once timing matters, silence collapses." By noon, the headlines had shifted. Not dramatically, but decisively. Questions raised about Ashford timeline. Executives defend process, avoid specifics. No accusations. No arrests. But no closure either. Edward left before the follow-ups. He always did. Rachel caught up to him outside. "They won't charge anyone," she said. Edward nodded. "No," he replied. "But they won't forget either." Rachel frowned. "You really think that matters?" she asked. Edward stopped. "Yes," he said. "Because systems hate uncertainty." Rachel looked back at the building. "They'll update the house," she said. Edward nodded. "They already have," he replied. "And people?" she asked. Edward considered. "They'll adjust," he said. "Just enough to feel safe again." Rachel sighed. "And Gideon?" she asked. Edward met her gaze. "He became friction," he said. "And friction always leaves a mark." Edward turned to leave. "This case won't be cited," he said. "It won't be taught." Rachel nodded. "But?" she asked. Edward answered quietly. "But somewhere," he said. A room will hesitate before it decides what normal means. Rachel felt a chill. That's all? She asked. Edward nodded. That's everything, he replied. Edward walked away. Behind him, the city absorbed the story the way it always did. Not with outrage. With adjustment. Epilogue: The rooms we build next. Edward Hale did not leave the city immediately. He never did. Leaving too quickly made endings feel clean, and nothing about this case deserved that courtesy. He walked instead. No destination. No schedule. Just movement. Cities, he had learned, revealed their real architecture only when you stopped asking where you were going. Edward passed buildings that watched without seeing. Glass towers that reflected sky and ignored bodies. Apartments sealed against noise, light, and interruption. Offices optimized for presence without accountability. Everywhere he looked, rooms were being taught how to expect people, and how not to notice when they disappeared. He stopped at a cafe and sat by the window. Inside, people spoke softly into devices that listened carefully and remembered nothing. Edward watched a man pause mid-sentence, waiting for a signal that never came. Watched a woman lower her voice when the room felt too attentive. Everyone was negotiating with invisible systems. Most of them didn't know it. Edward stirred his coffee slowly. The case was already being simplified. Not erased. Not denied. Reframed. That was always the outcome. He thought of Gideon Ashford again. Not as a victim. As a variable. A man who believed friction was a feature, not a flaw. A man who understood that resistance slowed things down for a reason. Gideon had not been naive. He had simply underestimated how patient consensus could be. Edward had seen it before. In hospitals that optimized for efficiency and lost patients quietly. In companies that automated decision-making until responsibility thinned out completely. In families that adjusted to absence so well no one remembered when the loss occurred. The pattern was always the same. Remove noise. Smooth transitions. Reward calm. And wait. Edward paid and left the cafe. Outside, a new building was rising behind temporary walls. A banner stretched across the fence. Smart living, designed for you. Edward stopped and studied the words. Designed for you. Not with you. Not by you. For. He imagined the rooms inside. Bedrooms that learned breathing patterns. Kitchens that adapted to habits. Living spaces that anticipated silence. He imagined future deaths. Not violent. Not sudden. Acceptable. Edward knew how this would be discussed in 10 years. Not as murder. Not even as failure. As an edge case. A lesson learned. A patch applied. Someone would say, "We fixed that." And they would believe it. Edward continued walking. His phone vibrated once. A message from Rachel. They updated the guidelines. New language. More oversight. Edward smiled faintly. Oversight. A word people used when they wanted distance to feel like care. He replied with one line. Oversight only works if someone is still watching. Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. Edward stopped at a crosswalk and waited. Cars passed smoothly, guided by systems that assumed compliance. He watched a pedestrian hesitate. Not because the light was red. Because the system felt confident. Edward understood that hesitation. It was the last human reflex that hadn't yet been optimized out. He crossed. On the other side, a residential building stood with lights already adjusting for evening. Edward looked up at the windows. Some were empty. Some were occupied. Some would soon change without anyone noticing. Edward thought about his work. He was often asked why he didn't stay. Why he didn't testify longer. Why he didn't push harder for consequences. The answer was always the same. Because systems didn't change when attacked. They changed when observed. Edward did not dismantle systems. He disturbed them. He introduced friction where smoothness had become dangerous. He forced rooms to hesitate. That was all he could do. He reached the train station just as dusk settled. The platform was quiet. Predictable. Comforting. Edward sat on a bench and watched people wait. Some checked schedules. Some checked messages. Some simply trusted the system to tell them when to move. Edward wondered how many future deaths would be called accidents. How many would be ruled natural? How many would occur in rooms that behaved exactly as designed? The train arrived on time. Of course it did. Edward stood and boarded without urgency. As the doors closed, he looked once more at the platform, at the signs, at the lighting, at the calm. All of it was built to make absence feel normal. Edward took his seat. He opened his notebook. He did not write names. He did not write accusations. He wrote a single line. When silence becomes comfortable, ask who paid for it. He closed the notebook. The train began to move. Another city waited. Another room would eventually decide what normal meant. And when it did, Edward Hale would be there. Not to shout, not to accuse, but to stand still long enough for silence to realize it was being watched.